Welcome to Light Novel Audiobook. Bind to the fake death system, the goddess turned into a black Yandere for me. Chapter 1. Click. Shen An's head hit the keyboard in front of him hard, typing out a string of meaningless garbled characters. Damn it, I really died suddenly this time. This was Shen An's last thought before he lost consciousness. He was just an ordinary office worker. If there is an afterlife, he will never work overtime to rush the PPT that his boss wants and cause sudden death. Who knew that the next second, he was awakened by a cheerful electronic sound, ding dong. Congratulations, lucky Mr. Shannon. You have successfully activated the deluxe version of the stand-in fake death system. Shannon was confused. What the hell, didn't I just die suddenly? The system replied with a smile. Don't be discouraged. Death is just the beginning of a new life. You are about to start a wonderful journey in the world of novels. Wait, what world of novels? Shannon hasn't reacted yet. Oh, don't worry. The system is like a lively tour guide. You will play a substitute role in various novel worlds. As long as you complete the tasks, you can accumulate enough points to revive again. Is it exciting? Shannon was half believing and half doubting. Is it true it's not a scam, is it? The system immediately put on an aggrieved expression. We are a formal system, and we are honest. If you don't believe me, look at these 5-star reviews. Shannon sighed helplessly. Okay, I'm dead anyway, so let's try it out. That's right. The system said happily. Are you ready? Our first stop is the fairy world. Before Shannon could answer, he felt dizzy. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a fairy mountain surrounded by clouds and mist. Wow, this picture is too clear! Shannon exclaimed. More shocking than 4K TV. The system said proudly, of course, we have the latest technology. Okay, don't stand there, your first task is... Just then, a cold woman suddenly appeared in front of Shannon and looked him up and down. Ahem. The system reminded in a low voice. She is the female sword master you are going to serve, come on. Before Shannon could react, he heard the female sword master coldly say, from today on, you are my forbidden fruit. What forbidden fruit? Shannon's eyes widened. Wait, is there something wrong with this script? Shannon stood on the fairy mountain with a confused face. Suddenly, he found a transparent screen in front of him. What is this? He opened it curiously. Ding dong. The system prompted happily. This is your exclusive script. It is recommended that you read it carefully so that you can complete the task better. Shannon turned to the first page and was stunned. I am the substitute of Bai Yueg Wang, the dead sword master in the world of cultivation. What kind of a title is this? He continued to read on, and the more he read, the more he felt something was wrong. Wait, the protagonist is also called Shannon. This is too coincidental. The system chuckled. This is not a coincidence, this is the role you are going to play. The system said happily. And you must be mentally prepared. This is a super bloody and sad book. Shannon continued to read on, his face getting uglier and uglier. So, Shannon in the book looks like the dead Taoist partner of the female sword master Ling Shuangxiu. She forced him to stay by her side as a substitute. Not only was his spiritual root cut off and his meridians destroyed, but he also had to endure all kinds of physical and mental torture. Hey, this is too miserable! Shannon exclaimed. I don't want to be abused. The system said gloatingly. No way, this is the content of the task. But don't worry, as long as you work hard to complete the task, you may be able to reverse the plot. Shannon wanted to cry but had no tears. Why do I feel like I've fallen into a pit? Just then, a cold voice came from a distance. Shannon, what are you doing there? Come here quickly. Shannon shuddered. Looking at the beautiful woman walking towards him, he thought. It's over, is this really going to start? The system laughed at the side. Come on, our poor stand-in. Remember to act well. Shannon put away the script with tears in his eyes. Get ready for the upcoming bloody plot. Chapter 2. Ling Shuangxiu approached slowly, her eyes as sharp as a knife. When she saw Shannon's face clearly, a trace of shock flashed in her cold eyes. How could it be? She murmured to herself, her voice almost inaudible. Shannon stood there blankly, at a loss. He could feel Ling Shuangxiu's eyes wandering on his face. It was as if she wanted to engrave every inch of his skin into her memory. Ling Shuangxiu's heart was beating wildly, the face in front of her was exactly the same as her deceased Taoist partner. The familiar outline, the gentle eyebrows, it was as if time had gone back and her lover was back to her. However, when she noticed Shannon's dull expression, an inexplicable anger suddenly ignited in her heart. Why? Ling Shuangxiu gritted her teeth and said. Why do you have his face? Shannon was startled by her sudden anger and stammered. I don't know. Ling Shuangxiu rushed forward, grabbed Shannon's neck, and pressed him against the tree. Her eyes were full of pain and anger. You are not him. How dare you appear in front of me with his face? Shannon was strangled to the point of being unable to breathe, and struggled desperately. Ling Shuangxiu looked at his painful expression, but a twisted pleasure surged in her heart. Since you look like him. Ling Shuangxiu sneered. Then stay with me forever. I want you to taste the pain of him abandoning me. After saying that, she struck Shannon's dantian with a palm, breaking his spiritual root. Shannon screamed and collapsed to the ground. Ling Shuangxiu looked down at the painful Shannon, but there was no mercy in her heart. She only felt a sense of revenge, as if this would punish the person who abandoned her. From today on, you will stay with me forever. Ling Shuangxiu said coldly. I will make you remember forever the price of betraying me. Shannon lay on the ground, his whole body in unbearable pain. He looked at Ling Shuangxiu's beautiful but cold face, his heart filled with fear and despair. It's over. He wailed in his heart. This plot is too bloody. How can I complete the mission alive? The system said gloatingly on the side. Congratulations, host, you have successfully entered the role. Come on, the exciting plot has just begun. Shannon rolled on the ground in pain. System, do you have any magical props? This hurts too much. The system responded hurriedly. Oh, host, don't worry. I'll turn on the painless mode for you now. With a slight sound, Shannon suddenly felt relaxed all over. As if the severe pain just now was just a nightmare. He breathed a sigh of relief and stood up shakily. At this time, Shannon's clothes were messy, there was a trace of blood on the corner of his mouth, and his cold face was somewhat sad and beautiful. He frowned slightly, and a trace of complex emotions appeared in his eyes. It was as if the Taoist partner who had experienced life and death separation had really returned to life. Ling Shuangxiu's heart trembled when she saw this scene. That familiar expression, that stubborn look. It was exactly the same as the lover in her memory. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether the person in front of her was a substitute or the real Shannon. Impossible. Ling Shuangxiu muttered to herself, with a trace of panic in her eyes. Shannon noticed Ling Shuangxiu's strangeness and was secretly happy. It seems that my acting skills are not bad. Ling Shuangxiu suppressed the waves in her heart and said coldly. Take him down. After that, she turned and left, her back revealing a bit of loneliness. Two disciples came forward to support Shen A and Shannon pretended to be weak and asked softly. Excuse me. Where should I go? A disciple answered in a low voice. Master Jianzun ordered us to take you to the wing room in the side courtyard. Shannon laughed in his heart. Oh, there is a special golden house. This plot is really bloody. With the help of the disciples, Shannon slowly walked towards the side courtyard. The system laughed at the side, the host's acting skills are good. But don't get carried away, there are more exciting plots waiting for you later. Chapter 3. Shannon followed his disciples to the side room in the courtyard, pushed the door open, and was immediately stunned by the scene in front of him. Wow, this is too luxurious! He couldn't help but exclaimed. The room was beautifully decorated with antique furniture, the soft brocade bed curtains, carved sandalwood tables and chairs, and famous calligraphy and paintings hanging on the wall all showed the owner's taste. However, this beautiful atmosphere was destroyed by one thing, there were several thick iron chains in the corner. Shannon swallowed his saliva. What is this for? Do you want to lock me up? The system said gloatingly. Host, don't be afraid, we are a serious substitute novel, this is a small prop to promote the plot. At this moment, Shannon's stomach suddenly growled. He looked around. Sure enough, there was a plate of exquisite snacks on the table. Shannon took off his bloody coat without saying a word. He changed into a clean white robe, sat down at the table and began to eat heartily. This pastry is quite delicious. Shannon sighed while eating, it seems that being a forbidden delicacy is not all bad. The system reminded helplessly. Host, don't forget your situation. This is a cruel article, and there will be a lot of suffering for you later. Shannon waved his hand nonchalantly. I know. But before that, let me enjoy it first. Just as Shannon was wolfing down his food, footsteps suddenly came from outside the door. Oh no, could it be Ling Shuangxiu is back? Shannon hurriedly put down the snacks and put on a pitiful look. The door slowly opened, and a figure appeared at the door. Ling Shuangxiu walked slowly into the room. Her appearance seemed to bring a gust of cold air. She was wearing a snow-white robe with light blue cloud patterns embroidered on the hem. It fluttered gently with her steps. A silver ribbon was tied around her waist. Her long black hair was tied up high and fixed with an exquisite jade hairpin. A few strands of hair fell on her ears, adding a touch of charm. Ling Shuangxiu's appearance was absolutely stunning. She had a pair of eyes as bright as cold stars, a high nose bridge, and skin as white as snow. She exuded a cold and noble temperament, as if she was a fairy who did not eat fireworks in the world. However, this beauty seemed a little scary because of the coldness in her eyes. Ling Shuangxiu walked to the bed and looked down at Shen A and Shannon was pretending to be pitiful at this time. He curled up on the bed, with fear and confusion in his eyes. Ling Shuangxiu stretched out her hand coldly, and lifted Shannon's chin with her slender fingers. Her movements seemed gentle, but with irresistible force. Look at me! Ling Shuangxiu ordered, her voice as cold as ice and snow. Shannon was forced to look up and meet Ling Shuangxiu's eyes. He could feel Ling Shuangxiu's breath brushing his face. Those beautiful eyes were filled with complex emotions. Pain, anger, nostalgia, and a hint of imperceptible tenderness. Ling Shuangxiu stared at Shannon's face. Her voice was low and dangerous. Tell me, who are you? Why do you have his face? Shen An's heartbeat accelerated, and he knew that his answer would determine the direction of the next plot. He trembled in his voice and said according to the lines in the script, "Your Majesty, I don't know what you are talking about. Please. Please let me go back." His voice was a little choked. As if he was really an innocent poor man involved. Ling Shuangxiu smiled coldly when she heard this. Her smile was not warm at all, but made people feel a chill. "Go back." Ling Shuangxiu repeated with sarcasm in her voice. "Do you think you still have a place to go back to?" The hand that was holding Shen An's chin suddenly increased its strength. The fingertips almost sank into his skin. Shannon couldn't help but take a breath of cold air, frowning in pain. Ling Shuangxiu leaned down, leaned close to Shen An's ear, and whispered. "From today on, this is your home. Don't even think about going anywhere." Her words were like ice, making Shannon tremble all over. Ling Shuangxiu slowly stood up, looking down at Shannon, with a hint of cruelty in her eyes. "Since you said you don't know, I'll let you remember it well." Ling Shuangxiu said coldly. "Remember who you are, remember your position." Shannon looked at Ling Shuangxiu's beautiful but cold face, and secretly groaned in his heart. "My God, this plot is too bloody. How can this woman be so scary?" Chapter 4. Host, come on. The exciting plot has just begun. Shannon complained in his heart, but his face still maintained a horrified expression. Ling Shuangxiu coldly picked up the shining iron chain and slowly walked towards Shen An. Shannon looked at the chain and couldn't help but shudder, with a flash of fear in his eyes. Don't do this!" Shannon said with a trembling voice, trying to retreat, but soon hit the head of the bed. Ling Shuangxiu was unmoved, grabbed Shen An's ankle, and roughly buckled the chain on it. With a click, the heavy iron chain locked Shannon firmly. "From now on," Ling Shuangxiu said coldly. "Without my order, you are not allowed to leave here half a step." Shannon looked down at his locked ankle, with mixed feelings in his heart. On the surface, he showed an expression of grievance and unwillingness, and even tears appeared in his eyes. Why do you treat me like this?" he asked with a sob. However, deep down in his heart, Shannon secretly breathed a sigh of relief. In his previous life, he was also an out-and-out homeboy, and he hardly left the house except for work. In fact, it seems that there is nothing wrong with it, Shannon muttered in his heart. Having food and drink without going out is simply a dream life. Of course, he would never say this idea out loud. Shannon continued to maintain a pitiful expression and secretly observed Ling Shuangxiu's reaction. Ling Shuangxiu looked down at Shannon, and a hint of complex emotions flashed in her eyes. She reached out and gently stroked Shen An's cheek, her movements unexpectedly gentle. "Because of your face." Ling Shuangxiu looked at him coldly. "If anything hurts your face, you don't have to live." After saying that, she turned and left, leaving Shannon alone in the room. Shannon looked at Ling Shuangxiu's back as she left and breathed a sigh of relief. He lay back on the bed and shook the iron chain on his feet. He thought, this play is really tiring to act. The system popped up at the right time. The host's acting is good. But don't relax too much, there are more exciting plots waiting for you later. The next morning, Shannon opened his eyes in a daze. Just when he wanted to stretch, the iron chain on his feet reminded him of his situation. Alas, it turned out not to be a dream. Shannon sighed. Just then, the door was gently pushed open, and a maid in a light green dress came in with a tray. "Sir, breakfast is ready," the maid said softly, her tone respectful and curious. Shannon sat up and watched the maid put the tray on the small table beside the bed. He couldn't help but brighten up. The food on the tray was exquisite and mouth-watering. A bowl of fragrant white porridge, next to it were several exquisite side dishes, emerald green vegetables, golden fried eggs, a small dish of fragrant pickled radish. There was also a bowl of clear lotus seed soup. There were a few red dates sprinkled on it, which looked sweet and delicious. Shannon thought, wow, this is too rich. But he took a closer look and found that although these dishes were exquisite, they were all very light, and none of them were heavy. Isn't this made according to the taste of Shannon in the original book? Shannon muttered to himself. It seems that Ling Shuangxiu really regards me as him. The maid saw Shannon staring at the food in a daze and asked cautiously. Sir, are these dishes not to your taste? Shannon came to his senses and shook his head quickly. No, very good. Thank you. The maid breathed a sigh of relief, bowed and left the room. Shannon looked at the food in front of him and couldn't help but laugh and cry. He likes heavy tastes, and these light dishes are not to his taste. Alas, it seems that I have to adapt to it in the future. Shannon said to himself. But it's a good deal to be able to eat such exquisite meals, right? Host, this is a rare opportunity. Enjoy this breakfast, maybe you won't be so lucky next time. Come on, you just know how to scare me. Despite this, Shannon still obediently began to enjoy this breakfast that was not very appetizing. After all, in this strange world, being able to have a full stomach is already a blessing. While he was eating, he was thinking about how to deal with Ling Shuangxiu next, and how to survive in this dangerous world. This stand-in game has just begun. Chapter 5. Shannon was eating breakfast when he suddenly remembered to check the next plot. He closed his eyes and silently asked the system. The system's voice sounded in his mind. Host, are you sure you want to watch it? It may be a little unpleasant. How unpleasant? Shannon asked curiously. The system sighed and began to play future plot clips. He checked the next plot and found that he would be tortured physically and mentally. Just highlight the word torture. And in the end, he would be sacrificed to resurrect the real Bai Yueguang Shannon. What is the purpose of this plot being so cruel? The system answered calmly. This is the charm of the torture text, host. At this moment, a suppressed cold suddenly approached. Shannon trembled all over and immediately realized what happened. Oh no, Ling Shuangxiu is here. Shannon quickly gathered his mind and put on a pitiful look. He knew that there might be another good show waiting for him to perform next. The door slowly opened, and Ling Shuangxiu's cold figure appeared at the door. Her eyes were as sharp as a knife, piercing Shannon directly. Shannon entered the role in a second, and said with a trembling voice. Your Excellency. Ling Shuangxiu smiled coldly and walked slowly towards Shannon. Shannon complained in his heart, but on the surface he still looked terrified. He trembled slightly, and his eyes were full of fear. He looked like a frightened deer. Ling Shuangxiu stared at Shannon coldly, with a sarcastic smile on the corner of her mouth. You are afraid of me? She stated. There was a hint of satisfaction in her tone. Shannon shook his head gently, tears welling up in his eyes. He said softly in a pitiful tone. No, Your Excellency. I just want to leave. Before the voice fell, there was a crisp sound of snap. Ling Shuangxiu's hand slapped Shannon's face fiercely. Then there was another slap. Another slap landed on the other side of Shannon's cheek. Shannon's head tilted to one side, and his cheek instantly became red and swollen. The tears that had been prepared in his eyes finally couldn't help but flow down. Ling Shuangxiu looked at Shannon coldly, with a flash of anger in her eyes. "Leave!" she sneered. "I said, you can't go anywhere without my permission." Shannon lowered his head, his shoulders trembling slightly, and he looked like he was sobbing silently. In fact, he was complaining in his heart. "Too much, don't hit someone in the face." The system was still gloating on the side. "Host, your acting skills are getting better and better." Shannon rolled his eyes in his heart, but his face still maintained an aggrieved expression. He raised his head and said in a crying voice, "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I shouldn't have said I was leaving." Ling Shuangxiu's expression eased a little. "Remember," she said softly. "Don't ever think about leaving me." Shannon resisted the urge to avoid. "Let Ling Shuangxiu touch his face." Ling Shuangxiu's eyes fell on Shannon's swollen cheeks, and a trace of heartache flashed in her eyes. She sighed softly, as if regretting her impulse. "Come here." Ling Shuangxiu suddenly called. A maid quickly entered the room, bowed her head respectfully and waited for instructions. "Bring the spiritual ointment," Ling Shuangxiu ordered, with a hint of urgency in her voice. The maid took the order and left, and soon returned with an exquisite jade box. Ling Shuangxiu took the jade box and signaled the maid to leave. Shannon watched all this and sneered in his heart. He knew that Ling Shuangxiu only had eyes for this face that was exactly the same as Shannon, who had died long ago. Her so-called heartache was nothing more than an obsession with the deceased. Ling Shuangxiu opened the jade box, and inside was a paste that exuded a faint fragrance. She gently scooped out some with her slender fingers and carefully applied it on Shannon's swollen cheeks. Shannon felt a coolness, and the redness, swelling and pain quickly subsided. He had to admit that the effect of this ointment was indeed magical. Chapter 6. Ling Shuangxiu's movements were surprisingly gentle, completely different from her coldness just now. She looked at Shannon's face intently, her eyes full of complex emotions. Nostalgia, pain, and a hint of imperceptible love. Shannon resisted the urge to avoid her and let Ling Shuangxiu touch his face. He lowered his eyes, pretending to be touched and afraid. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have hurt your face." Shannon knew that this sentence was not said to him, but to the Shannon who was no longer alive. He sneered in his heart, but a timid smile appeared on his face. "It's okay, Your Majesty," Shannon said softly. "I know you didn't mean it." Ling Shuangxiu's eyes flashed with relief when she heard this. She gently stroked Shannon's cheek, as if she was stroking a precious treasure. "Have a good rest," Ling Shuangxiu said, and stood up. "I'll come see you later." Shannon nodded and watched Ling Shuangxiu leave the room. When the door closed, he finally breathed a sigh of relief, and the expression on his face became complicated instantly. This crazy woman. It's okay to treat me as a substitute, but she beats people at every turn. The system popped up at the right time. "Host, your acting skills are getting better and better. But the next plot may be more exciting." "What plot?" "Host, it's time to escape," the system said excitedly. Shannon was startled and almost jumped out of the bed. "What escape?" He lowered his voice. "Are you crazy? Isn't this just asking for death?" The system chuckled. "Hee, host, this is interesting." Shannon wanted to get the system out of his mind. "Do you have any misunderstanding about interesting points?" The system disagreed. "Don't say that, host. Think about it, if you succeed in escaping, how exciting it would be. Readers will love the scene where Ling Shuangxiu chases you frantically." Shannon sighed helplessly. What if I get caught? But he seemed even more excited. Isn't that just right? After failing to escape, Ling Shuangxiu will definitely punish you more severely. Think about it, what a wonderful plot that would be. Shen An's scalp tingled when he heard it. But he could only continue to do it. The system clicked to open the chain. Host, it's time to act. The system said excitedly. According to the original book plot, you should now flip out of the window. Shannon looked at his free feet in surprise. He walked to the window lightly. It was pitch black outside the window, and the silence was terrifying. Do you really want to do this? Shannon asked hesitantly. The system urged. Hurry up. The story doesn't wait. Shannon gritted his teeth and carefully pushed open the window. The cold wind rushed in instantly, and he shuddered. Then, Shannon flipped over the windowsill and landed on the ground outside. Success! Shannon was secretly happy. He quietly shuttled between the buildings in the moonlight. Every step was cautious, for fear of alarming the guards. His heart was beating hard, and he seemed to be able to hear the footsteps of the pursuers at any time. Finally, Shannon came to the back mountain. The mountain road was rugged, but he couldn't care so much. He ran forward desperately, stumbling and almost falling several times. Almost, almost. Shannon kept cheering himself up in his heart. The mountain gate finally appeared in front of him, and at this moment, a burst of deep chill suddenly hit. Shannon trembled all over, looked up, and snowflakes began to fall from the sky. No way! Wow! Host, the plot is so exciting! Shannon didn't care about the system and ran towards the mountain gate desperately. The snow fell heavier and heavier, and soon a thick layer of snow accumulated on the ground. The cold made Shen An's steps difficult, but he didn't dare to stop. At this moment, a cold voice came from behind. Where do you want to go? Shannon froze and turned around slowly. Ling Shuangxiu was standing not far away, exuding a cold breath. Snowflakes were flying around her. It was as if she was the source of this sudden blizzard. It's over. Shen An's heart sank, knowing that he might not be able to escape this time. The system said excitedly. Great! Host, the next part is the highlight. Chapter 7. Ling Shuangxiu approached slowly, and every step made Shen An's heart beat faster. She said coldly, Why do you want to escape? Shannon immediately began to read according to the script. Your Majesty, I just want to get some fresh air. Ling Shuangxiu sneered. Fresh air, running to the mountain gate in the middle of the night to get some fresh air. Ling Shuangxiu suddenly reached out and grabbed Shen An's hair, forcing him to look up. Why do you want to escape? Am I not good to you? Your Majesty. I just want freedom. It was like triggering a keyword. Ling Shuangxiu's expression instantly became gloomy. Freedom? Does your freedom mean leaving me? She waved her hand violently, and a chill knocked Shannon to the ground. Shannon cried out in pain, feeling as if his whole body had fallen into an ice cave. Ling Shuangxiu looked down at him, her voice cold. Since you want freedom so much, then taste the taste of freedom. After saying that, she grabbed Shannon and instantly returned to the palace. The punishment that followed made Shannon feel miserable. Whipping, ice torture, mental torture. Ling Shuangxiu seemed to vent all her anger on him. Finally, Shannon fell to the ground with wounds all over his body, almost unconscious. Ling Shuangxiu squatted down and gently stroked his face. Remember, you will never escape from me. Shannon nodded weakly, but said in his heart. System, is this plot over? I'm going to faint. The system sighed on the side. Of course, host, this plot is really exciting. Before Shannon fainted, he just wanted to beat the system up. The next morning, he opened his eyes. The severe pain from all over his body made Shannon feel miserable. He tried to move. But he found that every slight movement involved the wounds on his body. It brought piercing pain. Shannon gritted his teeth and forced himself to sit up, looking down at his body. His clothes had long been torn to shreds, and his back was covered with whip marks, bruises, and burns. Some wounds were still bleeding, while others had already scabbed over. His arms, chest, back, and even legs were not spared. It was as if he had been carefully taken care of with torture instruments. However, when Shannon reached out to touch his face, he was surprised to find that it was as smooth as before, without any scars. He fumbled to his feet and stumbled to the bronze mirror in the room. The mirror reflected an intact face, in sharp contrast to the bruised body. "Hat!" Shannon sneered. "It seems that the Lord is still reluctant to hurt the face of her beloved." At this moment, his eyes fell on his feet. The chains that were already very thick were replaced with thicker and heavier ones at some point. The new chains had a cold metallic luster. They looked much stronger than before. The system's voice sounded at the right time. "Wow, host, you look really terribly now. But don't worry, readers will definitely like this kind of plot." Shannon was immersed in his thoughts when the door was suddenly knocked gently. A maid walked in respectfully, holding a set of neatly folded clothes in her hands. "Sir," the maid said with her head down. "This is the clothes that the Lord ordered me to send." Shannon reluctantly sat up and took the clothes. When he unfolded the clothes, he was stunned. This is a snow-white robe with delicate cloud patterns embroidered on the cuffs and collar, and a light blue jade belt tied around the waist. Shannon's fingers unconsciously stroked the soft fabric, and a strange feeling arose in his heart. He recognized this dress. This is exactly the robe that Shannon often wore in the original book. He remembered that the book had described Shannon countless times in this dress. Ling Shuangxiu always looked at him with loving eyes. Now, this symbolic dress is in his hands. "Sir, do you need me to help you tie your hair?" the maid asked softly. Shannon came back to his senses and shook his head. "No, I can do it myself." "You go down." The maid bowed and left, leaving Shannon alone staring at the dress in a daze. He slowly stood up and put on the robe carefully. The fabric gently adhered to his scarred body, bringing a hint of coolness. Shannon walked to the bronze mirror and looked at himself in the mirror. Against the white robe, his face looked even paler. The face that was exactly the same as the late Shannon was now wearing the clothes that he loved most in his life. What a irony! Shannon smiled self-deprecatingly. Am I not the perfect substitute for Shannon now? Wow, host! You look so much like Shannon in the original novel. Ling Shuangxiu will love you even more now. Shannon did not answer, but just straightened his clothes. No matter what, he had to continue acting. Until he could return to the real world. Chapter 8. Ling Shuangxiu pushed open the door and walked in slowly. Her eyes fell on Shannon, and a complex emotion flashed in her eyes. Shannon turned to face Ling Shuangxiu, and was about to say something ridiculous. Don't talk. Ling Shuangxiu interrupted him coldly. When you talk, you're not like him anymore. Ling Shuangxiu walked to the table and sat down, her eyes still on Shannon. The white robe made her feel as if she saw her former lover. Pour me some wine. Ling Shuangxiu said lightly. Shannon walked silently to the wine cabinet on the side and took out a pot of wine and a cup. He carefully filled a glass for Ling Shuangxiu, and then respectfully presented it with both hands. Ling Shuangxiu took the glass, but did not drink it immediately. She stared at the shaking wine in the glass, as if she was lost in memories. "Do you know?" Ling Shuangxiu suddenly spoke. "He always sits next to me when I drink." Shannon stood aside and kept silent. What could he say? Ling Shuangxiu looked up at Shannon, a trace of pain flashed in her eyes. "Kneel down," she ordered. Shannon hesitated for a moment, but still knelt down beside Ling Shuangxiu obediently. Ling Shuangxiu reached out and touched Shannon's face, her eyes full of complex emotions. "You really look like him," she said softly. "But you are not him after all." Ling Shuangxiu ordered Shannon to pour wine again. He stood up silently and carefully filled her glass. "So obedient," Ling Shuangxiu sneered. "Like a well-trained dog." Shannon rolled his eyes inwardly. "And a dog that looks like your dead ghost's lover." The system interrupted at the right time. "Host, your idea is really mean. But I like it." Shannon was too lazy to pay attention to the system and continued to play the role of being docile and obedient. He stood beside Ling Shuangxiu with his eyebrows lowered and his eyes lowered, like a perfect servant. Ling Shuangxiu reached out and stroked his cheek, a trace of nostalgia flashed in her eyes. "You really look like him," she murmured to herself. Shannon secretly complained in his heart. "If I didn't look like him, you would have thrown me out to feed the dogs, right?" The system said excitedly. "Wow, host, you really acted well. Ling Shuangxiu certainly didn't expect that you had so much inner drama." Shannon rolled his eyes even more in his heart. "Shut up, system. If it weren't for completing the mission and returning to the real world, I wouldn't be playing a stand-in here." Ling Shuangxiu suddenly stood up and looked down at Shannon, and Shannon knelt down without hesitation. No one can doubt his professionalism. After all, he got himself into trouble in his last life. Here we go again, this kind of plot again. If I could go back, I would definitely beat up the author of this kind of script. The system said gloatingly. "Host, you have to hold on. This kind of plot is the most exciting for readers." Shannon resisted the urge to flip the table system and maintained a submissive attitude. "Yes, to stimulate readers." He sneered in his heart. "I think you are going to stimulate me to death." Ling Shuangxiu looked down at him. "Remember, you will always be mine," she said coldly. Shannon showed a panicked and submissive expression on the surface, but he was complaining wildly in his heart. The system suddenly said excitedly. "Host, read this line quickly, who are you looking at through my eyes?" Shannon was speechless. "System, are you crazy? How can I say this kind of line?" But the system was relentless. "Hurry up and tell me. This is the key turning point of the plot." Shannon took a deep breath, resisted his inner resistance, and slowly said, "Your Majesty, who are you looking at through my eyes?" As soon as the voice fell, Ling Shuangxiu's expression instantly turned cold. She smiled coldly, and a trace of anger flashed in her eyes. The next second, Shannon felt that he was hit by a powerful force. The whole person flew out like a kite with a broken string and fell heavily to the ground. Shannon struggled to get up, but heard Ling Shuangxiu's cold voice coming from above his head. "You are just a dog, and you really want to compare yourself with him." Shannon lay on the ground, feeling the pain all over his body, but he was madly complaining in his heart. "System, are you doing this on purpose? You asked me to say such a suicidal line." "Wow! Host, you are awesome. This plot is absolutely brilliant. Readers will love it." Love it, I think you will love me to death. Ling Shuangxiu looked down at Shannon on the ground, her eyes full of contempt and anger. Remember your identity, she said coldly. You will never be able to be him. You are just a substitute, an obedient dog. Shannon said in a low voice, holding back the pain. Yes. I know. I'm sorry. But he was complaining in his heart. I know, I am the dog and you are the master. How long will this bloody plot last? The system interrupted at the right time. Host, you have to hold on. This kind of sadomasochistic plot is the most attractive to readers. Go to your sadomasochistic plot. When I return to the real world, I must uninstall your cheating system. Chapter 9. The next morning, Shannon opened his eyes with difficulty. He tried to get up, but felt severe pain all over his body. Especially his back and waist, as if they had been crushed by someone. Hiss! Shannon took a breath of cold air and sat up with a grin. System, are you sure this abusive article is really reasonable? Wouldn't a normal person die long ago if he suffered such torture? The system responded happily. Host, you look so pitiful. Readers will definitely feel sorry for you. Feel sorry? I think it's more like gloating. He moved to the cabinet beside the bed with difficulty and took out an exquisite jade bottle. This is the best medicine Ling Shuangxiu gave him, and it works amazingly. Oh, this is the only thing that makes you look like a human being. Shannon smiled self-deprecatingly. At least you didn't treat me, the dog, badly in terms of food and lodging. He opened the jade bottle, and a refreshing fragrance wafted into his nose. Shannon carefully applied the ointment to the wounds on his body, and he couldn't help but gasp every time he touched a place. The expression on his face was distorted beyond recognition. It hurts so much. Shannon screamed without any image while applying the ointment. Sword Master, you are too cruel, aren't you? My stand-in won't die before the performance is over. Just then, there was a light knock on the door. Shannon quickly put away his painful expression. He pretended to be calm and said, "Come in." A maid walked in respectfully, holding a set of brand new clothes in her hands. "Sir, this is the new clothes that the Lord ordered me to send," the maid said with her head down. Shannon took the clothes and sighed in his heart. Another round of torture is about to begin, and he has no choice but to continue acting. "Thank you," he said softly, and then began to dress slowly. Every movement affected the wound on his body, forcing him to endure the pain. What drama will be performed today? Shannon asked himself in his heart. I hope there will be no more "you are my dog, my old bones can't stand the tossing." The system said excitedly, "Host, get ready for new challenges. Today's plot will definitely be more exciting." Shannon shook his head helplessly and continued his life as a substitute. He only hoped to complete the task as soon as possible and escape from this crazy world of novels. Shannon followed the maid to the courtyard. He saw Ling Shuangxiu sitting next to the pavilion, with the colorful Guqin in front of her. "Isn't that?" Shannon was startled and recognized the Guqin. "That's right, host. That's the magic weapon left by the original owner Shannon before he died." "System, can you not be so excited? This is going to kill me." At this glance, it was the rhythm of him playing the piano. Ling Shuangxiu looked at Shannon coldly and said, "Come here." Shannon walked closer with his head held high, secretly complaining in his heart. Ling Shuangxiu pointed at the Guqin and said lightly, "Play a song." Shannon froze in place, sweating coldly. How could he play the Guqin? Usually, he would just hum it randomly when singing karaoke. This. Shannon stuttered. Your Majesty, my hands are a little uncomfortable today. Ling Shuangxiu's eyes turned cold. What, can't you even do this little thing? Shannon swallowed his saliva and sat down in front of the gherkin with his head held high. He stretched out his trembling hand and gently stroked the strings. System! Help! Shannon screamed frantically in his heart. The system responded with gloating. Host, come on! This is the time to test your acting skills. Shannon took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and pretended to play. His fingers randomly plucked the strings, making a series of harsh noises. Ling Shuangxiu's face became more and more ugly, and a trace of anger flashed in her eyes. Shannon was miserable. It's over, this time it's really exposed. I should have signed up for a gherkin class. Just then, a strange energy suddenly surged out of the gherkin and wrapped around Shannon's fingers. The next second, beautiful piano sounds flowed out from his fingertips. Shannon opened his eyes in surprise and found that his fingers seemed to be controlled by some force, dancing flexibly on the strings. Ling Shuangxiu's expression changed from gloomy to sunny, and a trace of nostalgia and relief flashed in her eyes. Shannon breathed a sigh of relief and thought. It seems that this magic weapon saved my life. The system said excitedly. Wow! Host, I didn't expect you to have such a hidden skill. Shut up! If this zither wasn't spiritual, I would bite has been chopped into pieces by Ling Shuangxiu. Chapter 10. Shannon finished playing the last note and breathed a sigh of relief. He looked up at Ling Shuangxiu cautiously, fearing that she would see any flaws. Ling Shuangxiu's expression was still cold, but there was a hint of imperceptible satisfaction in her eyes. Not bad, there is a reward. Shannon was delighted. Finally I got away with it. Ling Shuangxiu waved her hand, indicating that Shannon could leave. Shannon felt as if he had been pardoned, and quickly stood up and left. Fearing that he would be exposed if he stayed for a second longer. After returning to the room, Shannon breathed a sigh of relief and collapsed on the bed. Finally I made it through. He said to himself. I wonder what the reward Ling Shuangxiu was talking about. Just then, he suddenly noticed that there was something wrong with the chain on his ankle. Shannon looked down. The original iron chain had turned into a golden chain without knowing when. It sparkled in the sun. Shannon! Wow! Host, look how beautiful this gold chain is. Ling Shuangxiu is so good to you. Shannon was so angry that his teeth itched. What a bullshit! This is called changing the soup but not the medicine. I am still a prisoner, okay. He lay on the bed weakly, staring at the gold chain on his wrist. He felt mixed emotions. Is this the so-called reward? Should I be moved by changing from an iron cage to a gold cage? Host, you have to be content. This is a real upgrade. The next morning, Shannon was sleeping. Suddenly, he was awakened by a hurried knock on the door. Sir, the Lord has ordered you to go to the kitchen to learn how to make cakes immediately. The maid's anxious voice came from outside the door. Shannon sat up with a start, his face blank. What, make cakes? The system said excitedly. Wow! Host, a new challenge is here. I eat instant noodles every day without cooking, how can I make any pastries? Although I was unwilling in my heart. But Shannon had to get up and followed the maid to the kitchen. In the kitchen, a master was waiting. He began to teach Shannon the skills of making pastries. But Shannon knew nothing and was in a mess. How do you mix this flour? How much sugar do you put? How do you use this mold? Shannon kept asking stupid questions. The master was almost collapsed. "Host, you are really clumsy like this." Shannon gritted his teeth. "Come and try. I see if you can do better than me." After working for a whole morning, Shannon finally made a crooked rabbit cake. Looking at this ugly finished product, he smiled bitterly and said, "How can this be like a rabbit? It's clearly a pile of shit." With a nervous mood, Shannon presented the pastry to Ling Shuangxiu. Ling Shuangxiu glanced at it coldly. Without saying a word, she directly knocked the plate to the ground. "Waste," she said coldly. At this moment, the system suddenly prompted. "Quickly say if you don't look like him, I can learn." Shannon was stunned, and then understood. If you don't look like him, I can learn." Ling Shuangxiu's expression changed slightly, and a hint of complex emotions flashed in her eyes. "I know I'm not him, but I can work hard to learn and become more like him. Please give me a chance." Ling Shuangxiu was silent for a moment, and finally said coldly, "Continue tomorrow." After that, she turned and left, leaving Shannon alone there. Shannon breathed a sigh of relief and slumped on the ground. The system said excitedly, "Wow! Host, your acting is really amazing. Don't mention it. I'm not acting, I'm just playing with my life." A few days later, Shannon stood in front of the chopping board, concentrating on adding the final details to a rabbit-shaped pastry. Finished. Shannon looked at his work with satisfaction. A lifelike rabbit pastry appeared in front of him. "Wow! Host, you've improved so fast. You're simply a genius." "Of course, I'm trying my best to learn." He carefully looked at the rabbit cake, the white and tender cake body, the pink ears, and the pair of black eyes decorated with icing, vivid, as if they were about to jump up in the next second. "I didn't expect I had this talent," Shannon said to himself. "If I can return to the real world, it seems that opening a dessert shop would not be a bad idea." Just then, Ling Shuangxiu walked into the kitchen. Shannon immediately became nervous and carefully presented the rabbit cake to her. Ling Shuangxiu carefully looked at the cake, her face still expressionless. But Shannon keenly noticed that her eyes seemed to be soft. And some. "It's okay," Ling Shuangxiu said lightly. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Shannon said respectfully. "I will continue to work hard." Ling Shuangxiu nodded and turned to leave. Just as she was about to walk out of the kitchen, she suddenly stopped and said without looking back, "You don't have to do it tomorrow." Chapter 11. The next morning, Shannon was surprised to find that the gold chain on his ankle could be taken off. He moved carefully, feeling the long-lost freedom. "What's going on?" Shannon asked in confusion. "Congratulations, host. This is the result of your hard work. It seems that Ling Shuangxiu has increased her trust in you. I think she thinks my dog is finally obedient." Despite this, he couldn't help walking around in the yard, enjoying the rare freedom. Although he couldn't leave the yard yet, but the expansion of his range of activities has made him feel much happier. Just as Shannon was immersed in this short happiness, the system suddenly urged, "Host, don't be too happy. A new task is coming." Shannon sighed. "Can't I enjoy it for a while?" Suddenly, an exquisite oil paper umbrella appeared in front of him out of thin air. "Take this umbrella and go to the lotus pond. Hurry up, don't let Ling Shuangxiu wait anxiously." Shannon picked up the umbrella helplessly and walked towards the lotus pond. From a distance, he saw Ling Shuangxiu standing alone by the pond. "Let the drizzle fall on her. What kind of drama is this?" Shannon muttered. But he still quickened his pace. He came to Ling Shuangxiu. Shannon carefully opened the umbrella to shield her from the rain. "Your Majesty, you will catch a cold," Shannon said softly. Ling Shuangxiu was still indifferent, as if she didn't hear his words. The rain slid down her hair, and her sleeves were already wet. "If you want to get wet in the rain, why don't you let me accompany you?" As he spoke, he tilted the umbrella slightly towards Ling Shuangxiu. Half of his body was exposed to the rain. Ling Shuangxiu finally reacted. She turned her head and looked at Shannon coldly. "What are you doing?" Shannon pretended to be calm and smiled. "I am accompanying your excellency to feel the rain." A trace of complex emotions flashed across Ling Shuangxiu's eyes. But she soon returned to indifference. "Boring," she said lightly, but did not leave. Shannon stood there, letting the rain wet his clothes. "Your Excellency, look at that lotus." He pointed to a lotus bud in the pond. "The life of a flower is not in life and death, but only in the moment of its blooming." Ling Shuangxiu was silent for a moment, and suddenly said, "Enough, go back." After saying that, she turned and left, leaving Shannon standing alone in the rain with an umbrella. As night fell, Shannon was preparing to have a good sleep. Suddenly a maid came in a hurry. "Sir, your Majesty summoned you to the piano room." Shannon rolled his eyes and thought. Again is Ling Shuangxiu bored? He lazily followed the maid to the piano room. When he opened the door, he saw Ling Shuangxiu sitting in front of a guqin, looking aloof. Ling Shuangxiu spoke lightly. "Come and play a song." Play the piano. He couldn't even recognize the full musical notation. This guqin was not the same as the previous one. "Isn't this embarrassing?" But Shannon still pretended to be respectful on his face. "Yes, your Majesty." He sat down in front of the guqin. Thinking to himself, "It's just a task, so I can just play it casually, finish it early and go to bed early." Shannon began to pluck the strings, and the sound was so terrible that it was unbearable to listen to. He couldn't help but complain in his heart. "My level is probably not even as good as a cat's meow." Ling Shuangxiu's brows were getting tighter and tighter, and a trace of displeasure flashed in her eyes. Shannon saw Ling Shuangxiu's expression and felt secretly happy. "Ha, you are unhappy, right? Who told you to torment me in the middle of the night?" Finally, Ling Shuangxiu said coldly, "Enough." Shannon immediately stopped and breathed a sigh of relief. "It's finally over, I can go back to sleep." Ling Shuangxiu stood up and looked down at Shannon, with disappointment in her voice. "Sure enough, it's just a fake." Shannon was happy. "Finally found it. I was a fake, sister, you just found out now." But he pretended to be aggrieved. "Your Majesty, I..." Ling Shuangxiu interrupted him. "Get out." Shannon left the piano room without saying anything, feeling happy. "Great, I can go back to sleep." Back in the room, Shannon lay comfortably on the bed with a smile on his face. The system said worriedly, "Host, are you going too far? I'm afraid you'll be strangled to death one day." Shannon yawned. "What's too much? I'm not the real Shannon. Besides, my goal is to complete the mission and go back. I'm not trying to please Ling Shuangxiu. Let her think whatever she wants, I'll just sleep." He turned over and muttered to himself. "I hope I can finish the task quickly, I've had enough of this damn place." Chapter 12. The next morning, Shannon was in a sweet dream when he was suddenly awakened by a rapid knock on the door. "Young master, the Lord has given an order." The maid's anxious voice came from outside the door. Shannon rubbed his sleepy eyes and thought, again is Ling Shuangxiu in menopause? Why is she looking for trouble every day? He opened the door lazily. The maid immediately conveyed Ling Shuangxiu's order. The Lord said that the young master must learn a song today. If he can't play it by the evening, he will chop off the young master's fingers. Shannon woke up instantly and his face turned pale. What chop off fingers? Is she crazy? The system reminded hurriedly. Host, go learn the piano quickly, don't cripple yourself. Shannon wanted to cry but had no tears. This is not learning the piano, this is to kill me. Helplessly, Shannon had to bite the bullet and start learning the piano. He found the music sheet and practiced hard on the guqin. Ding dong ding dong. The sound of the guqin was so bad that it could kill people. Shannon complained while practicing. If I really had this ability, would I still need to travel through time? In this way, Shannon practiced all day without sleep and forgetting to eat. By the evening, his fingers had blisters. But he finally played a barely acceptable song. Ling Shuangxiu walked into the piano room with a cold face. Let's start. Shannon took a deep breath and started playing with trembling hands. Although the notes would go out of tune from time to time, he finally played a complete song. Ling Shuangxiu listened expressionlessly and said lightly. Just passed. Your fingers are temporarily saved. Shannon breathed a sigh of relief, but he was complaining crazily in his heart. Pass, is it easy for me? Can you learn a piece of music in one day? Ling Shuangxiu said coldly before turning away. Continue tomorrow. If there is no progress, you know the consequences. Shannon almost fainted. What, come again? You are torturing me to death. Back to the room. Shannon looked at his swollen fingers and wanted to cry but had no tears. System, tell me, am I here to complete the task or to be tortured? The system comforted. Host, don't be discouraged, this may also be part of the task. Come on, I think Ling Shuangxiu is bored and is making fun of me. He sighed, resignedly picked up the music score and continued to practice. After all, compared with losing a finger, the pain of practicing the piano is nothing. 1 week later, the moon was in the sky and the courtyard was quiet. Shannon sat on a blue stone, stroking the guqin with his fingers. His appearance became more and more handsome, with long hair like a waterfall and eyes like stars, like a banished immortal. Ling Shuangxiu stood aside, wearing a white dress that was whiter than snow. Her ice blue eyes flashed with complex light. She stared at Shannon quietly. Shannon took a deep breath and began to play. His fingers danced flexibly on the strings. The melodious and graceful sound of the piano echoed in the night sky. The moonlight sprinkled on him, giving him a layer of soft silver glow. Ling Shuangxiu closed her eyes, as if immersed in this beautiful melody. The breeze blew past, gently blowing her hair and clothes, like a fairy in a painting. The song ended. Shannon exhaled gently and looked up at Ling Shuangxiu. Ling Shuangxiu slowly opened her eyes, and her eyes were like two pools of autumn water under the moonlight. She looked at Shannon coldly, with the corners of her mouth slightly raised. You finally look a bit like him. Shannon just lowered his head and said softly. Thank you for your teaching, Your Excellency. Ling Shuangxiu turned around and faced away from Shannon. The moonlight outlined her perfect silhouette. Keep practicing, don't let this good-looking body down. After saying that, she left the courtyard coldly. Leaving Shannon alone sitting in the moonlight, his fingers unconsciously stroking the strings. Shannon looked at Ling Shuangxiu's departing back. He took a long breath and stretched his waist. Oh my, it's finally over. This sword master is really a hassle. He muttered softly, stood up, and prepared to go back to the room. The system suddenly appeared. Host, you play the piano well. Ling Shuangxiu praised you. Come on, if it weren't for your mastery of piano buff, I'm afraid I would have become a disabled person with missing fingers. The system said proudly. Isn't this my wit? If I hadn't reminded you to exchange points for buffs, you wouldn't even be able to touch the strings now. Shannon said as he walked. Okay, you're the best. But to be honest, this buff is pretty powerful. You can play like this in just 1 week. I find it incredible. Thennies, our buff is top-notch stuff. But host, don't get carried away, this buff also has a time limit. Shannon suddenly became nervous. What, there is a time limit? Doesn't that mean? Chapter 13. The system interrupted him. Don't panic, the time limit is still long. But you'd better take this time to practice hard and make these skills your own. Shannon breathed a sigh of relief. Okay, I know. The next morning, Shannon was awakened by the maid just after waking up. Sir, the Lord has ordered you to go to the side hall immediately. Shannon rubbed his sleepy eyes and thought. Again is Ling Shuangxiu bored? Arriving at the side hall, Shannon saw Ling Shuangxiu sitting in the main seat. There was a dance costume next to her. Ling Shuangxiu said coldly. Put it on and dance in front of me. Shannon's eyes widened. What dance? Wear women's clothes? Helplessly, Shannon had to put on the dance costume. He twisted his body awkwardly, trying to imitate the dance moves he had seen on TV. Ling Shuangxiu looked at this funny scene expressionlessly. A hint of impatience flashed in her eyes. Shannon danced until he was sweating profusely, and kept complaining in his heart. I'm here to complete the task, not to wear women's clothes. After the dance, Ling Shuangxiu said coldly. It's ugly. Come on, put him in the iron cage. So Shannon was locked in a big iron cage. Ling Shuangxiu said lightly. Reflect well. I'll let you out tomorrow. In this way, Shannon spent a day in the iron cage. But it was not too troublesome to have food and drink. Even when he went to the toilet, someone opened the cage and followed him as if they were afraid that he would run away. Shannon curled up in the iron cage, with mixed feelings in his heart. He recalled this ridiculous day and couldn't help but smile bitterly. Let me dance in women's clothes and put me in a cage. It's simply inexplicable. He stretched and felt the restraint brought by the iron cage. Although the space was small, at least there was a cushion to lie on. Shannon simply relaxed his body and decided to enjoy this rare vacation. I can't go out anyway, so I might as well just lie down like this. It's a rare opportunity to do nothing. It would be great if it could always be like this. No need to worry about the mission, no need to deal with that crazy woman Ling Shuangxiu, just lie like this. Well, it's so comfortable. Just when Shannon was about to fall asleep, Ling Shuangxiu suddenly appeared in front of the cage. She looked at Shannon coldly. How is your reflection? Shannon sat up slowly and said in a deep voice. Thank you for your teachings, Your Majesty. I have reflected deeply. Ling Shuangxiu raised her eyebrows, as if she was not satisfied with his answer. She turned and left, leaving a sentence, continue tomorrow. The next morning, Shannon was taken to the side hall again. This time, Ling Shuangxiu prepared a thin gauze dance dress for him. Shannon cursed in his heart, but he had to change into this almost transparent dress. He stood in the center of the hall, the gauze fluttering with his movements, revealing his figure vaguely. Ling Shuangxiu watched coldly, her brows furrowed tighter and tighter. Finally, Ling Shuangxiu stood up and couldn't bear it anymore. She strode towards Shannon and knocked him to the ground. Waste. Ling Shuangxiu said coldly. Except that this face looks like him, there is nothing good about him. Shannon fell to the ground, secretly happy in his heart. He thought, I can lie down again. On the surface, he pretended to be pitiful, with tears in his eyes. At this moment, the system reminded him that it was time to read some bloody lines. Shannon understood and immediately held his face. He said in the tone of the real Shannon. Your Majesty, what did I do wrong? I will definitely try to correct it. Please give me another chance. Ling Shuangxiu was stunned at first, then realized that he was deliberately imitating the real Shannon. This poor imitation angered her even more. She grabbed Shannon by the collar and dragged him to the rack. Then Ling Shuangxiu tied Shannon to the rack fiercely. Then she picked up the torture instruments. I want to see how long you can pretend. Shannon screamed. He realized that his cleverness might have gone too far. Chapter 14. Shannon was lying on the bed, with whip wounds all over his body. He grimaced in pain and couldn't help complaining. What kind of script is this? Why is it so cruel? The system reminded him gently. Host, all the dog-blooded stories are like this, physically and mentally abusive. Don't worry, there are more dog-blooded plots waiting for you later. After listening to this, Shannon almost jumped out of the bed. He gritted his teeth and said, Is there more dog-blooded? Oh my god! But he thought about it. In order to successfully complete the mission and go home, he decided to continue to endure the humiliation. At this time, Ling Shuangxiu pushed the door open. Shannon immediately adjusted his posture and posed like a sick beauty. He deliberately left his shoulders half exposed and looked at Ling Shuangxiu with a dazed look. Ling Shuangxiu saw this scene, and a trace of complex emotions flashed in her eyes. She walked to the bed and reached out to gently touch Shannon's face. You. Ling Shuangxiu hesitated to speak, and finally just said coldly. You are a bit like him, it's your blessing. After saying that, she waved her hand, and a soft light enveloped Shannon's body. In an instant, the scars on his body disappeared. Shannon looked at his healed body in surprise. He thought, is this the legendary Mary Sue magic skill? Ling Shuangxiu turned around and prepared to leave, but stopped. She looked back at Shannon coldly. Take good care of your injuries. Tomorrow, I will come to see you again. Shannon looked at Ling Shuangxiu's back as she left. He couldn't help but fall into deep thought. He murmured to himself, why is this plot getting weirder and weirder? Host, please keep up your performance. Remember, the more bloody the better. Shannon sighed helplessly and lay back on the bed. The next morning, the system suddenly reminded Shannon. Host, according to the bloody plot, it's time for you to run away for the second time. The system also gave Shannon a set of light clothes. It said that it would be easier for him to escape. Shannon put on his clothes and thought. Again, this script is really full of routines. He slowly climbed out of the window, looking leisurely and contented. Anyway, we will be caught back, why are we so anxious? Shannon thought to himself, and walked briskly out of the hall. Just then, a cold voice suddenly came from behind, where do you want to go? Shannon trembled all over and turned around slowly. I saw Ling Shuangxiu standing there. She was dressed in white, and her long hair fell like a waterfall. Her ice blue eyes seemed to be able to see through people's hearts, and her thin lips were tightly pursed, revealing a hint of displeasure. Ling Shuangxiu's appearance was absolutely beautiful. But she gave people a sense of inaccessibility and coldness. Before Shannon could react, Ling Shuangxiu had already arrived in front of him like lightning and pushed him to the ground. She leaned close to Shen An's ear and said coldly, "I really want to cut off your hands and feet, so that you won't run away." Shannon was so scared that he trembled all over. He thought, this script is too cruel. However, just when Ling Shuangxiu was about to attack, she saw Shen An's face that was exactly the same as the real Shannon. Her eyes suddenly became complicated. Gently stroking Shen An's cheek, she whispered, "It's just that way you won't be like him." He could only lie stiffly on the ground and let Ling Shuangxiu's fingers wander on his face. The system reminded him in time. "Host, say something quickly. Remember, it must be bloody." He deliberately angered the other party. He said it with a trembling face. She said tremblingly, "Your Majesty, why do you always treat me like this? What have I done wrong?" Looking at the expression that was similar to the dead man, she slowly released the hand that was holding Shannon. "Come back with me. If you dare to run away again, I don't mind making you become unlike him." In this way, Shannon was brought back to the hall again, and the patrol of the guards was strengthened. Chapter 15. As night fell, Ling Shuangxiu was drinking alone in a side hall. She ordered someone to bring Shannon and said coldly, "Pour wine for me." Shannon carefully filled her glass. Ling Shuangxiu drank it all in one gulp. She looked at him with a dazed look. A mocking smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. "You know you can never be like him." Ling Shuangxiu's voice was drunken, but still cold. "You. No matter how much you imitate, you are just a poor imitation." Shannon lowered his head and dared not speak. Ling Shuangxiu suddenly stood up. She coldly threw the glass in front of him. Then she waved her sleeves and prepared to leave. At this moment, the system reminded hurriedly, "Host, the opportunity has come. Hurry up and hug the thighs and say some disgusting words." Shannon made up his mind and rushed forward to hug Ling Shuangxiu's thighs. He raised his head. With tears in her eyes, she said in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, I really like you. Why do you always ignore me?" Ling Shuangxiu was stunned and looked down at Shannon, who was holding her legs. Her eyes changed from surprise to disgust. Finally, they turned into a coldness. "Get out of here!" Shannon fell to the ground after being kicked. But he continued to act relentlessly. "Your Majesty, please give me a chance. I am willing to do anything for you." Boring person. After saying that, Ling Shuangxiu turned and left, leaving Shannon lying on the ground alone. Shannon lay on the ground and waited for a while. After making sure that Ling Shuangxiu really left, he slowly got up. He patted the dust off his body. Humming a little song, he walked leisurely to his room. "Finally, I coaxed that crazy woman away." Shannon thought to himself, "I can have a good sleep tonight." After returning to the room, Shannon lay on the soft bed and stretched his limbs. He sighed with satisfaction and soon fell asleep. The next day, Ling Shuangxiu came again in a different outfit. She was dressed more elegantly today, and the ink-colored long skirt set off her cold and beautiful temperament. Shannon was taken to her study. Watching Ling Shuangxiu sitting at the desk to deal with the memorials of all sizes in the sect, Shannon sat aside bored. He picked up the cakes on the table and ate them. He chewed the sweet and delicious snacks. He looked at Ling Shuangxiu, who was working hard. Suddenly, Ling Shuangxiu called out, "Shen An." Shannon held half a cake in his mouth and looked up at Ling Shuangxiu. She was still looking down at the memorials, as if the call just now was just an illusion. Just as Shannon was about to continue enjoying the cakes, Ling Shuangxiu said coldly, "You are mine, and only mine." Shannon was stunned by this sentence. He looked at Ling Shuangxiu carefully, but found that there was no warmth in her eyes. Not to mention love. Those cold eyes seemed to be asserting sovereignty, rather than expressing feelings. Shannon swallowed the cake in his mouth. He secretly complained in his heart, "This script is too bloody, right? What do you want to do?" He resisted the urge to roll his eyes and pretended to be flattered. He stuttered, "Yes. Yes, Your Majesty. I will always be yours." Ling Shuangxiu snorted and continued to review the memorials. Shannon continued to eat cakes on the side. He was thinking about how to deal with the bloody plot that might appear next. "System," Shannon called in his heart. "Are you sure you can really complete the task like this?" The system answered leisurely, "Host, believe me, the more ridiculous, the more interesting it is. Keep up your performance, the best is yet to come." Ling Shuangxiu suddenly said, "Crawl over here." Shannon was stunned, and then realized that this was another ridiculous plot. He sighed secretly, put down the cake in his hand, and crawled in front of Ling Shuangxiu obediently. Ling Shuangxiu looked down at Shannon, who was kneeling on the ground. The cold eyes seemed to freeze him. She stretched out her slender fingers and gently lifted Shannon's chin. She coldly looked at the face that was exactly the same as the real Shannon. "Smile," Ling Shuangxiu ordered, with a hint of imperceptible expectation in her tone. Shannon's heart tightened, knowing that this was a test. He tried to recall the original owner's expression and tried his best to imitate an elegant and cold smile. However, Ling Shuangxiu's brows furrowed even tighter. She released Shannon's chin and said coldly, "Not similar enough." Shannon secretly complained in his heart. He pretended to be aggrieved. He asked carefully, "Your Excellency, what did I do wrong? Please give me some advice." Shannon knelt on the ground, looking terrified on the surface. But he was complaining wildly in his heart, "Damn, this woman is too sick. Isn't it just that she looks like her Taoist partner? Is it necessary to torment her like this?" "Host, please be careful with your words. The protagonist is currently in a state of great emotional fluctuation. I suggest you be more careful." I know. I don't want to die young." He took a deep breath, raised his head, and deliberately imitated the original owner's cold and indifferent expression. There was still a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Your Excellency," Shannon said softly, with a tremor in his voice. "I know I was wrong. I just want to share more of your worries." Ling Shuangxiu's eyes moved slightly. She seemed to be touched by this familiar expression. But soon, she returned to indifference. She said coldly, "Go to the forbidden ground in the back mountain and reflect on your mistakes for 3 days." Shannon nodded secretly in his heart, but on the surface he looked like he was in great pain, kneeling and retreating. "I will go to reflect on my mistakes now, please forgive me, Your Majesty." After saying that, he lowered his head and walked away quickly, fearing that Ling Shuangxiu would regret it. After leaving the hall, Shannon breathed a sigh of relief, with a smug smile on his lips. "Hee, my acting is good. Now I can hide in peace." "Host, please don't get carried away. The crisis has not been resolved." I know, I will be careful." As he walked towards the back mountain, he was thinking about how to spend these 3 days. Chapter 16. Shannon was locked up in a small stone house in the forbidden area of the back mountain. As soon as he closed the door, he couldn't wait to open the system space. "Haha, look at the food I prepared." Shannon proudly took out a bunch of snacks and drinks. Oh, the host is well prepared. What, are you planning to have a party here? Stop talking nonsense, I'm preparing for a rainy day. Come on, host. You just want to be lazy and have some peace and quiet. Same here. Shannon said while chewing potato chips. Aren't you happy to be free? The system was silent for a moment, and then said faintly. Host, do you know you really look like a useless male protagonist? Shannon almost choked on the potato chips. Hey! Why is your system so wicked? Same here. The system imitated his tone and said. In this way, Shannon spent 3 days in the system's teasing and mutual ridicule. He lay down to eat, drink, read novels and play games, feeling so comfortable. 3 days later, Shannon stood in front of Ling Shuangxiu. He immediately switched to a pitiful mode. Your Excellency! His eyes were filled with tears and his voice was trembling. During these 3 days, I have missed you every day and couldn't sleep at night. Ling Shuangxiu glanced at him coldly, with a flash of disgust in her eyes. Stop talking so slickly here. Shannon cursed in his heart, you are so hard to please. But his face showed a more affectionate expression. Your Excellency has misunderstood. The world can bear witness to my feelings for you. The system couldn't help but complain. Host, your acting is too exaggerated, isn't it? Like a miserable male supporting role in a TV series. Shannon roared in his heart, shut up. This is called professionalism. Since you know your mistake, do your best in the future and don't let me down again. Shannon nodded and bowed, yes. Disciple will follow your teachings. Looking at Ling Shuangxiu's departing back, Shannon finally breathed a sigh of relief, and the expression on his face collapsed instantly. The system said gloatingly, congratulations to the host, you have survived another disaster. But I'm afraid your face will be stiff from smiling, right? Shannon gritted his teeth, shut up. If you say that again, I will mute you. Oh, host, spare me. The system pretended to be scared and the voice was full of jokes. Shannon sighed helplessly. I wondered when this day would end. Late at night, the candle light flickered in the hall. Ling Shuangxiu was buried in a pile of documents, and suddenly said, Shannon, come here. Shannon heard the call and immediately trotted in from the outer hall separated by a wall. He secretly complained in his heart. Here it comes again, why are you not sleeping in the middle of the night? The system said gloatingly. Hey, host, it seems that you will stay up late again tonight. Shut up. You only know how to gloat. He stood respectfully beside Ling Shuangxiu, lowered his eyebrows and said pleasantly. What does your majesty want me to do? Ling Shuangxiu said coldly without raising her head. Make me a cup of tea. Shannon could only go to make tea obediently. While he was busy, he looked around. Suddenly, he noticed the decorations in the hall. Those calligraphy and paintings, tea sets, ornaments. Almost all of them were left by the original owner. Host, these were all made or selected by the original owner. It seems that someone still can't let go. No wonder Ling Shuangxiu almost became possessed after the original owner died. Shen An's heart moved, but he quickly suppressed this thought. He held the tea and carefully placed it in front of Ling Shuangxiu. Your Majesty, the tea is ready. Ling Shuangxiu raised her eyes and glanced at him with cold eyes. Put it down and get out. Shannon felt depressed. Damn, you treat me like a dog, and you don't even look at me straight. But he was still respectful on the surface. Yes, Your Majesty. I'll take my leave. Just walk to the door. Ling Shuangxiu called him again. Wait. Shen An's heart tightened, and he turned around and asked. Your Majesty, do you have any other instructions? Ling Shuangxiu pointed to the futon in the corner. Sit there. Shannon was stunned, and then understood this was to let him stay by the side like a dog. He suppressed his dissatisfaction. He sat down on the futon obediently. The system couldn't help but tease. Oh, host, you really look like a loyal little slave. Shannon gritted his teeth, try to say it again. Chapter 17. The next day, Shannon knelt beside Ling Shuangxiu again, watching her review documents. He sighed in his heart, these days, I am really more and more like a dog. Host, your kneeling posture is really standard, it seems that you have practiced it. System, if you can't speak, don't speak. Just then, Ling Shuangxiu suddenly stopped writing, and her eyes became extremely cold. She slowly turned to Shannon, and a trace of madness flashed in her eyes. You! She gritted her teeth and said. Why do you want to leave me? Shannon was stunned, and before he could react, he felt a sharp pain. Ling Shuangxiu slapped him on the chest with a palm, knocking him several meters away. Your Majesty! Shannon exclaimed, but he was madly complaining in his heart. Damn, is this woman crazy? The system hurriedly reminded, Host, be careful. Her inner demon has an attack. Ling Shuangxiu approached step by step, with terrifying spiritual power condensed in her hands. She sneered, do you think I won't recognize you just because you changed your face? Shannon, you are such a heartless man. Shannon begged for mercy. Your Majesty, calm down. I don't know how I have offended you. Before he finished speaking, another palm came. Shannon barely dodged it, but was still hit by the aftermath and spit out a mouthful of blood. The system said anxiously. Host, think of a way. You will die if you continue like this. Shannon felt that he was about to die. He could already see the great-grandmother waving in heaven. But suddenly a flash of inspiration came to him. He stood up with all his strength and looked directly into Ling Shuangxiu's eyes. Your Majesty! He imitated the original owner's tone. I have never left you. Ling Shuangxiu was startled and her attack slowed down a little. Shannon took the opportunity to continue, I have always been by your side, watching you and protecting you. These words seemed to touch Ling Shuangxiu. Her eyes gradually regained clarity, but then turned cold again. Get out! She said coldly. Shannon was as if pardoned. He quickly left the hall. When he reached a safe place, he breathed a sigh of relief and slumped on the ground. The system teased. Wow, host, your acting skills are good. I almost believed it. Shannon sat weakly at the door of the hall. Stop talking nonsense. I just want to have a good rest now. Shannon staggered back to his room. As soon as he entered the room, he saw a table full of various precious medicines. He smiled bitterly and shook his head, secretly complaining in his heart, Ha, this work injury treatment is pretty good. But seriously, this work injury is too serious, isn't it? Oh, host, you are compensated. It seems that someone still has a conscience. Conscience, she is feeling guilty. Beat someone half to death first, and then give him some medicine. Does he really think I am a toy? While complaining, he began to treat the wound. When applying the ointment, he grimaced in pain. Hiss! This medicine is quite effective, but it hurts too damn much. The system said leisurely. Host, you have to get used to it. This kind of beating and coaxing drama will probably happen more in the future. Shannon got furious when he heard it. Hey! Are you cursing me? I don't want to be beaten every day. The system said with a smile. Oh, I'm doing this for your own good. Be prepared in advance, and you won't feel so much pain when you get beaten in the future. Shannon gritted his teeth and looked coldly at the floating system in the air. Shut up! If you say anything else, I'll uninstall you. The system immediately pretended to be pitiful. Oh, host, please spare me, I'm just concerned about you. Shannon sighed helplessly and continued to treat his wounds. He looked at his scarred self in the mirror and couldn't help but laugh at himself. Task, this is not a substitute, it's just a scapegoat. Ling Shuangxiu, you really know how to play. After treating the wound, Shannon lay on the bed, feeling the effect of the medicine slowly take effect. He closed his eyes and muttered to himself, I hope nothing will happen tomorrow. The system said faintly, Host, you are still too young. Don't set such flags randomly. Shannon suddenly opened his eyes. Damn it! Shut up! Stop talking nonsense! After a while, Shannon fell asleep in a daze. He was completely unaware of the cold eyes in front of his bed in the middle of the night and the murderous snow outside the window. Chapter 18. The next morning, Shannon was awakened by the system. Host, a new task is here. Make a rabbit osmanthus cake for Ling Shuangxiu. Shannon complained in a daze. Early in the morning. Wait, rabbit osmanthus cake. The system explained, yes, this is the original owner's best snack. Go to the kitchen quickly, I have prepared the ingredients. Shannon walked to the kitchen and complained, what are you doing, eating osmanthus cake early in the morning? Under the guidance of the system, Shannon began to make osmanthus cake. He carefully pinched the cake into the shape of a rabbit, which was very lifelike. He brought the snacks to Ling Shuangxiu's study and said respectfully, Your Excellency, the disciple made some snacks for you. Ling Shuangxiu looked up and a hint of surprise flashed in her eyes. She picked up a rabbit osmanthus cake and looked at it carefully. Why is it made into a rabbit shape? She asked lightly, with a hint of imperceptible nostalgia in her eyes. Shannon's heart tightened, and he quickly made up an excuse. Disciple thinks rabbits are cute, and wants to please His Majesty. Ling Shuangxiu said softly and took a bite of the dessert. Her expression softened a little, and she seemed to be lost in memories. Shannon breathed a sigh of relief, thinking, fortunately, I fooled her. But the system said faintly, Host, don't be too happy too soon. This big guy is not easy to fool. Shannon rolled his eyes in his heart, I know, I will be careful. Just then, Ling Shuangxiu suddenly said, in the future. Make some every day. Shannon was stunned, and then replied respectfully, Yes, Your Majesty. Disciple obeys your order. After walking out of the study, Shannon breathed a sigh of relief. He touched his face and muttered to himself, This face is really useful. However, when will this day end? The next day, Shannon sat leisurely in the room, eating melon seeds and drinking tea while watching the movie projected by the system. Tisk tisk, this plot is too bloody, isn't it? Shannon complained while chewing melon seeds. The system appeared with a smile. Host, you still have the nerve to say others aren't you living in a bloody drama yourself? Come on, I can't help myself. By the way, what do you think Ling Shuangxiu is going to do to torture people today? Who knows, maybe you will be asked to kneel down and serve again, or have another work injury. Shannon was about to refute, but suddenly felt a chill. He turned his head stiffly, and saw Ling Shuangxiu appeared behind him at some point, looking at him with cold eyes. Who are you talking to? Ling Shuangxiu's cold voice sounded, as if it could freeze the air. Shannon broke out in a cold sweat and his brain was working fast. It's over. How to explain this? The system was also panicked. Host, you're on your own. Shannon pretended to be calm and stammered. Your Excellency. Your Excellency, the disciple was just talking to himself. Ling Shuangxiu narrowed her eyes, obviously not believing his explanation. She approached slowly, and every step made Shen An's heart beat faster. Really? She sneered. Then tell me, what is torture? Shannon wanted to cry but had no tears. Damn, how much did she hear? At this critical moment, the system suddenly spoke. Host. Tell me you're rehearsing a drama. Shannon had a flash of inspiration and said quickly. Reporting to the Lord, the disciple is just rehearsing a play. Those strange words are lines in the script. Ling Shuangxiu stared at him for a long time. Shannon felt that he might die. Finally, she spoke, in that case, then perform it in front of me. Shannon. Ha ha ha, host, this is going to be a good show. Shannon complained wildly in his heart. System, you are a pitfall. What should I do now? Looking at Ling Shuangxiu's murderous eyes, Shannon knew that he could not hide. He took a deep breath and thought. Forget it, I'll go for it. Chapter 19. Shannon made up his mind and decided to go all out to disgust Ling Shuangxiu. He pretended to be pitiful, with a timid look in his eyes and a trembling voice, Wu. Please don't abuse me. I'm just an innocent little poor thing, he thought to himself. This behavior is definitely not like the original owner, Ling Shuangxiu shouldn't be fooled, right? However, unexpectedly, Ling Shuangxiu's eyes suddenly became extremely hot. She slowly approached, with a dangerous light flashing in her eyes. Are you seducing me? Ling Shuangxiu's voice was low and hoarse. Shannon was shocked. No way this works. He quickly stepped back and stumbled to the ground in panic. Ling Shuangxiu approached and stretched out her hand to tear his clothes. Wait! Your Majesty! Calm down! Shannon panicked and covered his clothes tightly. At this critical moment, Ling Shuangxiu suddenly froze. She blinked, as if waking up from a state. You are not her. Ling Shuangxiu murmured to herself, and the heat in her eyes faded. Instead, there was a trace of confusion and annoyance. Shannon breathed a sigh of relief, thinking, finally I'm awake. Ling Shuangxiu stood up and straightened her clothes. She regained her usual indifference, forget what happened just now. After saying that, she turned and left. Shannon was left alone, feeling terrified. The system said quietly, Host, you are very good at playing hard to get. Shut up, I almost died here. He stood up, patted the dust off his body, and secretly thanked himself, fortunately, I am smart, otherwise I would have died here today. But what happened to Ling Shuangxiu just now? Could it be that the inner demon has come again late at night? Shannon was sleeping soundly. Suddenly, a chill came and woke him up. He felt that there seemed to be something extra on the bed. Shannon opened his eyes and saw a beautiful face. Ling Shuangxiu's long hair fell down, which looked particularly moving in the moonlight. However, her eyes were chaotic, as if she had lost her mind. Before Shannon could react, Ling Shuangxiu suddenly took action. She pressed him to the bed. Her strength was so great that Shannon couldn't break free at all. Your Excellency! Shannon was panicked. What are you doing? Ling Shuangxiu didn't answer, but leaned down and breathed on Shen An's face. Her eyes were blurred, as if she was in some kind of hallucination. Finally! I finally found you! Ling Shuangxiu whispered, with a hint of sob in her voice. Shen An's heart was beating like a drum. Oh no, she has another attack of the inner demon. Shannon tried to struggle, but Ling Shuangxiu was too strong. Just then, Ling Shuangxiu suddenly lowered her head and bit Shen An's neck. The moonlight poured into the room like water. In this hazy halo, Ling Shuangxiu's face was even more beautiful. Her jade-like skin glowed in the moonlight, long eyelashes cast a faint shadow on her face. Originally a cold and noble face. At this moment, the bright red blood at the corner of her mouth added a bit of weird beauty. Shannon felt a stinging pain in his neck. Warm blood slowly overflowed. He looked at the beautiful but extremely dangerous woman in front of him. Ling Shuangxiu lowered her eyes and whispered softly. Shannon! Why did you leave me? Her voice was full of sadness and attachment. Shannon cried in his heart and explained quickly. Your Majesty, please wake up. I am not Shannon. Hearing this, Ling Shuangxiu's eyes suddenly turned cold. She said coldly, You want to lie to me again? Before she finished speaking, she suddenly took out a pair of iron chains from her sleeves. In the moon under the light, the iron chain shone with a cold luster. Ling Shuangxiu tied Shen An's limbs tightly with a neat movement. The force was so great that Shen An could not resist anything. After doing all this, Ling Shuangxiu nodded with satisfaction. Her eyes became blurry again, and she felt dizzy. She gently hugged Shen An, as if she was holding the most precious treasure. Then she fell into a deep sleep. Shen An was tied up and could not move, so he could only lie on his back, watching the moonlight cast mottled shadows on the ceiling. He sighed and thought, this time I can't wash it off even if I jump into the Yellow River. I'm afraid Ling Shuangxiu will kill me when she wakes up tomorrow. Host, it seems that you are going to spend an unforgettable night, city or not. Shannon was about to complain to the system in his heart. Suddenly, he felt that Ling Shuangxiu's hug became tighter. She seemed to be afraid of him in her dream leave. Her arms tightly wrapped around his body, as if she wanted to rub him into her bones and blood. Ling Shuangxiu's long hair fell beside Shannon. It rose and fell gently with her breathing. Under the moonlight, her sleeping face was extremely beautiful. But there was a trace of sadness between her eyebrows. Don't go! Don't leave me! Ling Shuangxiu murmured in her dream, her voice full of fragility and pleading. I won't let you leave again. Her fingers unconsciously grasped Shen An's clothes. Chapter 20. The next morning, Shannon opened his eyes in a daze. Suddenly he met a pair of cold eyes. Ling Shuangxiu stared at him expressionlessly. It's over, I really have to explain this time. Shannon thought, his brain was working fast on how to explain what happened last night. He was about to speak, but Ling Shuangxiu suddenly grabbed his hand and gently kissed his wrist bone. Shen An! She whispered in a low voice. Shannon was stunned, and then he realized that Ling Shuangxiu was still in the state of inner demon. Well, it seems that I have to continue acting. He sighed in his heart. I should have not taken this job earlier. This is not a substitute, it's simply a scapegoat. Host, aren't you the best at acting? Come on. He suppressed his inner complaints and put on an affectionate look. No, my love, you finally woke up. Ling Shuangxiu's eyes softened. But Shannon knew that this tenderness was not for him. He was just acting, and Ling Shuangxiu was just dreaming. I hope she wakes up soon. Shannon prayed secretly, otherwise, I'm afraid that my stand-in will die young. Ling Shuangxiu slowly lifted Shen An's chin, with a hint of confusion and expectation in her eyes. Her voice was low and charming. "Why don't you kiss me today?" Shannon complained in his heart. "My God, how long will this play last?" He suppressed his inner helplessness and desire to complain. He gently held Ling Shuangxiu's hand and kissed the back of her hand. Ling Shuangxiu's skin smelled of snow. It was as clear as the cold air in winter. "This job is getting more and more outrageous," Shannon complained in his heart. "I'm here to be a stand-in, not to act in an idle drama. It's better to work before, at least you don't have to worry about being killed by a beautiful woman at any time," the system said gloatingly. "Host, aren't you enjoying it how many people want to kiss Ling Shuangxiu but don't have the chance?" Shannon rolled his eyes in his heart. "What do you know, I'm dancing on the edge of a knife. If she wakes up, I'll turn from a stand-in into a corpse." Despite constant complaints in his heart, Shen An's expression did not change at all. Still maintaining a gentle and affectionate look, he whispered, "Forgive my negligence, my love." Ling Shuangxiu seemed very satisfied with his performance, and the corners of her mouth rose slightly. However, the confusion in her eyes made Shen An's heart beat. Ling Shuangxiu stood up gracefully, her long hair falling like a waterfall. She stretched out her hand to Shannon. "Come, pour wine for me." Shannon sighed in his heart. Drinking so early in the morning, this life is unbearable. But on the surface, he still responded respectfully. "Yes, my love." He stood up and took the wine pot and cup and filled Ling Shuangxiu's cup. The aroma of wine filled the air, and Shannon secretly rejoiced. "Fortunately, I have a good alcohol tolerance, so I should be able to handle it." Ling Shuangxiu raised her cup with a dazed look. "Drink with me." Shannon had no choice but to drink with her. 1 cup, 2 cups, 3 cups. Gradually, Shannon felt dizzy. He was surprised to find that Ling Shuangxiu was not affected at all. Instead, she became more and more interested as she drank. "No way!" Shannon wailed in his heart. "My proud alcohol tolerance is actually not enough." The system said gloatingly, "Host, you are overestimating yourself." Shannon tried to stay awake, but the scene in front of him began to blur. He secretly regretted, "I should have found an excuse to refuse earlier. Now, I am drunk and unconscious. If she wakes up, won't I be at the mercy of others?" Ling Shuangxiu seemed to be unaware of his state. She continued to pour wine, another glass. Shannon wanted to cry but had no tears, so he could only continue to hold on. Shannon was drunk and confused, and his body leaned softly on the chair. He tried to stay awake, but the scene in front of him became more and more blurred. Ling Shuangxiu slowly approached, pinching his chin with her slender fingers. Before Shannon could react, he felt a chill on his neck. It was the iron chain tied to his feet before, and now it has become a collar. "It's over." Shannon tried to think in his drunkenness. "Now I've really become a pet." He covered his clothes pitifully, wailing in his heart. "I was still a single dog before I traveled through the book. How come I was targeted by a beautiful lady as soon as I arrived? This script is too bloody." The system said gloatingly. "Host, don't you want to experience an exciting life? Isn't it here? Go to your exciting life. I just want to get off work safely now." At this moment, Ling Shuangxiu finally fell drunk. She staggered and fell on Shannon, breathing evenly, obviously asleep. Chapter 21. Shannon was drunk and barely supported himself. He looked at Ling Shuangxiu who fell on him. "No, I have to find a way to get her back," otherwise I will be finished when I wake up tomorrow. He stood up shakily, holding the wall with one hand and supporting Ling Shuangxiu with the other. Oh my god, why is she so heavy? Shannon gritted his teeth and insisted. He moved towards Ling Shuangxiu's hall step by step. The corridor seemed extremely long. Shannon felt like he was running an endless marathon. Finally arrived at Ling Shuangxiu's hall. He used up his last bit of strength to put her on the bed. Finally. It's done. Shannon breathed a sigh of relief. But then he remembered that he had to go back. He stumbled out of the hall. The alcohol was taking effect, and he felt unwell. Shannon crawled and almost fell several times. This is not a stand-in job at all. He thought in a daze. It's just a life-threatening job. Finally, Shannon returned to his room. He fell headfirst onto the bed and instantly lost consciousness. The system said faintly. "Host, your acting is really professional." But Shannon could no longer hear. He fell into a deep sleep, hoping that everything would be just a dream when he woke up tomorrow. The next morning, the sun shone through the curtains into Ling Shuangxiu's bedroom. She slowly opened her eyes, still feeling a little dizzy. Ling Shuangxiu sat up and looked around. She found herself lying in her own hall. But her memory of last night was vague. Suddenly, a familiar scent drifted into her nose. Ling Shuangxiu looked up at the burning incense in the corner. That was Shen An's favorite scent. The meeting in the dream seemed to be just an illusion. But the sense of reality was lingering. Ling Shuangxiu stood up coldly, and for some reason, she was in a very unhappy mood. She walked to the window, looked at the scenery outside, and frowned. Why did I dream about him? Ling Shuangxiu asked herself. Is it because of this incense? An inexplicable irritability surged in my heart. In the side hall next door, Shannon was leisurely sipping tea in the room. He thought, anyway, I'm going to die anyway, so I might as well eat and drink enough first. Suddenly, the door was pushed open. Ling Shuangxiu walked in coldly, her eyes as sharp as a knife. Shannon almost choked on the tea, and quickly put down the cup and stood up. Greetings, Your Majesty. Ling Shuangxiu looked at him coldly. Did I see you yesterday? Shannon was shocked, but his face remained calm. He pretended to think for a while, and then answered respectfully. Your Excellency, I was practicing in the room yesterday and didn't see you. He prayed in his heart. I hope she doesn't remember anything. Otherwise I'll die here. Host, you're such a good lie. I'm doing this to save my life, okay? Ling Shuangxiu narrowed her eyes, as if to judge the truth of his words. Shannon suppressed his guilt and maintained a respectful attitude. In this tense atmosphere, Shannon suddenly noticed that Ling Shuangxiu's eyes were dazed for a moment. He was moved. Does she really not remember anything? Ling Shuangxiu was silent for a moment, and finally said coldly, I know, you can leave. He breathed a sigh of relief as he walked out of the door. Finally I fooled her. I almost thought she remembered. Shannon was really bored staying in the room. He thought, at least go out and get some fresh air. I can't stay here all the time. He carefully pushed open the door and walked towards the courtyard. The sun shone on him, and Shannon couldn't help but take a deep breath of fresh air. Ah, it feels so good to be free. However, his good mood only lasted for a few seconds. What are you doing? A cold voice came from behind. Shannon froze and turned to see Ling Shuangxiu staring at him coldly. Your Excellency! Your Excellency, I just want to come out and get some fresh air. Shannon explained stutteringly. Ling Shuangxiu narrowed her eyes. It seems that you don't understand your identity well enough. She waved her hand, and two guards immediately stepped forward to grab Shen A and Ling Shuangxiu said coldly. Put him back in the cage. Shannon was dragged back to the room and put back into the oversized cage. Shannon sighed, but seemed particularly calm. He found a comfortable position and lay down skillfully, and said to the system. Come on, as usual, play something exciting. The system immediately projected a bloody drama in his mind. Shannon watched and studied at the same time all kinds of exaggerated lines and expressions. Oh, I'm so pitiful. Shannon imitated the stand-in in the play, pretending to be pitiful. Your Majesty, why do you treat me like this? Am I just a substitute in your eyes? He changed his tone again. Host, your acting skills have improved a lot. Shannon said proudly. That's right, I'm a professional. Let's have some more heart-wrenching dramas. That's it. Shannon watched the bloody drama with relish in the cage, imitating a few exaggerated lines from time to time. He even began to think about how to perform these recently learned lines when he saw Ling Shuangxiu next time. Although this job is a pit, at least I can watch the drama for free. Shannon comforted himself. Just then, footsteps were heard outside. Shannon immediately put away his playful expression, put on a pitiful look, and prepared to show his skills. Chapter 22. Shannon heard the footsteps and immediately got into the mood. He quickly pulled his clothes loose, revealing a large area of white skin. He also rubbed his eyes with his hands, making the corners of his eyes slightly red, looking pitiful. Ling Shuangxiu walked in domineeringly. He glanced coldly at Shannon in the cage. Shannon immediately began his performance. He trembled slightly and said in a crying voice. Your Majesty! You are here! He deliberately let his clothes slip off his shoulders. He looked at Ling Shuangxiu with a dazed look. There was a trace of grievance and desire in his eyes. Your Majesty, why do you treat me like this? Am I really just an insignificant substitute in your eyes? Shannon said with a trembling voice using the lines he had just learned. He stretched out his hand carefully. It seemed that he wanted to touch Ling Shuangxiu, but he didn't dare. I just want a little pity from you. Ling Shuangxiu's eyes flashed a little complicated, but soon returned to coldness. She said coldly. You are just a stand-in, don't forget your identity. Shannon was secretly happy. It seems that my acting skills have improved a lot, even she has been influenced by me. But on the surface, he continued to look pitiful. Tears welled up in his eyes. Yes. I know, Your Majesty. I just hope to see you more. Just then, the system suddenly reminded. Host, don't go too far, be careful not to play too hard. Shannon was shocked and quickly restrained himself. He lowered his head and pretended to be helpless. Ling Shuangxiu looked at Shannon in the cage, and her eyes gradually became complicated. That face was exactly the same as her deceased Taoist partner. Let the hatred in her heart gradually shift to the stand-in in front of her. She reached out coldly. She lifted up Shannon in the cage and pulled him closer to her. Ling Shuangxiu's eyes flashed with pain and anger, and she said in a cold voice, Do you think you can please me like this? Don't forget, you are just a substitute, a fake. Her fingers gently stroked Shannon's face. She continued, The funny thing is that you are becoming more and more like him. Ling Shuangxiu's eyes became sharper. Tell me, who are you? Why are you so similar? Shannon felt the murderous intent in Ling Shuangxiu's words. Your Majesty, I am just a humble substitute. I don't know why I am so similar, but I am willing to do anything for you. She let go of her hand, and Shannon fell back into the cage. Ling Shuangxiu looked down at him. Interesting, I want to see if you can really replace him. The next day, Shannon prepared rabbit cakes as usual and carefully presented them to Ling Shuangxiu. Your Excellency, this is today's snack. Shannon said respectfully. Ling Shuangxiu was still indifferent, just glanced at him lightly and said, "Put it down." Shannon was about to turn around and leave when Ling Shuangxiu suddenly spoke. "Wait, go and light incense for me." Shannon was stunned for a moment, then responded respectfully. "Yes, Your Excellency." He walked to the incense burner beside him and carefully lit the incense. During the whole process, he could feel Ling Shuangxiu's cold eyes staring at him. He couldn't help but feel a little flustered. "Your Excellency. Do you have any other instructions?" Shannon asked tentatively. Ling Shuangxiu suddenly said, "Undress." Shannon heard Ling Shuangxiu asking him to undress. He immediately cried out in pain, "Oh my God, why do you want to take off your clothes again? I don't want to be seen naked again." He wailed in his heart. However, Ling Shuangxiu's cold eyes stared at him, as if she could see through him. Shannon felt a chill coming over him, knowing that he could not refuse. He began to untie his belt reluctantly with shaking hands. "Why am I always unlucky?" Shannon complained in his heart. At this moment, the system suddenly said with gloating, "Oh, host, it seems that you are going to sacrifice again. Do you want me to play some background music to cheer you up?" Shannon roared in his heart. "Shut up!" The clothes slowly slipped off, revealing his fair skin. Shannon was so nervous that he almost suffocated. His heartbeat was so fast that it seemed to jump out of his chest. "Your Majesty! Is this okay?" he asked carefully, his voice trembling slightly. Ling Shuangxiu scanned his body coldly. Her eyes stayed at his waist. Unfortunately, there was no familiar lotus birthmark there. Shannon felt like a cold snake staring at its prey. He couldn't help but hit a shudder. Just when he thought something was going to happen, Ling Shuangxiu suddenly said, "Put it on." Shannon hurriedly put on his clothes. He secretly thanked himself that nothing happened. The system immediately teased, "Oh, host, you are really a man of virtue. Why are you so nervous? Don't you want to add some excitement to the plot?" Shannon scolded in his heart, "What do you know? I am a serious person." As night fell, Shannon was preparing to rest. Suddenly heard footsteps outside the door. He sat up vigilantly, only to see Ling Shuangxiu push the door in. Her eyes were blurred, as if she had fallen into the inner demon again. "Your Majesty?" Shannon asked tentatively, secretly saying that it was not good. Ling Shuangxiu slowly approached, with complex emotions flashing in her eyes. She whispered, "Shannon, is it you?" Shannon immediately understood that Ling Shuangxiu had mistaken him for the deceased Taoist partner again. He didn't know how to deal with it. He could only say cautiously, "Your Majesty, are you okay?" Ling Shuangxiu suddenly reached out and touched Shannon's face. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Why did you leave me?" Shannon froze in place, not daring to move. The system sounded in his mind. "Host, the opportunity has come. Perform well." Shannon struggled in his heart. He knew that this was a dangerous situation, and he might get burned if he was not careful. At this moment, Ling Shuangxiu suddenly approached, as if to kiss him. Shannon saw that Ling Shuangxiu was about to kiss him. He was panicked. At the critical moment, he had an idea. He quickly pulled out a thick book of immortal cultivation from the bedside. He stood between the two. "Pa! Ling Shuangxiu's kiss was heavily imprinted on the cover of the book. Shannon breathed a sigh of relief, thinking. Fortunately, I was smart and almost had to sacrifice myself. I am a stand-in, not a real stand-in. The system couldn't help but complain. Host, your operation is really unique. Ling Shuangxiu was holding the book in a daze, and she didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Her eyes were hazy and her voice was choked. Yandere. Why did you leave me? Why did you turn into a book? Shannon looked at Ling Shuangxiu mumbling to herself while holding the book. He said carefully, Your Majesty, you are drunk, why don't you take a rest first? Ling Shuangxiu held the book tightly. Tears fell. No. Yandere, don't go. I can't lose you again. Shannon didn't know what to do for a while, so he could only let Ling Shuangxiu hold the book. He secretly rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, I reacted quickly, otherwise I would be the one being held now. The system teased. Host, you are keeping your chastity like a jade, but are you sure it's safe? Shannon glared at the system. Shut up. I'm protecting myself. Chapter 23. Shannon looked at the drunk Ling Shuangxiu and thought that it was too dangerous to be in the same room like this. He quietly got up and tiptoed towards the door. It's better to slip away first, so as not to have too many dreams at night. Shannon thought to himself. Host, are you going to escape at the last minute? Shannon didn't bother to pay attention to the system's teasing, and carefully reached out to push the door. Just when his fingers were about to touch the door handle, suddenly he felt a chill on his back. He turned around stiffly. Ling Shuangxiu had stood behind him without knowing when. A pair of eyes stared at him gloomily. Your Excellency! Shannon stuttered, cold sweat running down his back. Ling Shuangxiu sneered. Want to escape? Before Shannon could react, Ling Shuangxiu had waved her hand and offered a pair of leg cuffs. Locked Shannon's ankles tightly. Before Shannon could say anything, he was dragged back by Ling Shuangxiu with his leg cuffs. Do you think you can escape? Ling Shuangxiu said coldly. Since you are here, don't even think about leaving. Shannon wanted to cry but had no tears, and cried in his heart. It's over, it's over. This time, I really can't wash it off even if I jump into the Yellow River. Oh, host, it seems that you will be busy tonight. Shannon gritted his teeth. Shut up. Ling Shuangxiu stared at Shannon coldly and asked, Are you afraid of me? Shannon hurriedly shook his head and pretended to be calm. How could it be, Your Majesty? I only have offer you. Ling Shuangxiu suddenly reached out and pinched his face, forcing him to look into those cold eyes. No, you are just afraid of me. She sneered and began to drag Shannon to the bed. Shannon's heartbeat accelerated and he said hurriedly. Your Majesty, I'll pour you a glass of wine. The night is still long, don't rush it. Ling Shuangxiu stopped moving, squinted her eyes and looked at him. Shannon took the opportunity to break free and walked quickly to the wine table. He leaned over and poured her a glass of wine. Come on, Your Majesty. This is your favorite nectar. Shannon offered the wine glass and prayed in his heart to drink it quickly. Ling Shuangxiu took the wine glass and drank it all. Seeing this, Shannon quickly poured another glass. In this way, he kept urging her to drink until Ling Shuangxiu's eyes began to blur. Finally, Ling Shuangxiu fell drunk on the bed. Shannon took a long breath and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. The system teased, Host, I didn't expect you to have this trick. Shannon rolled his eyes at the system. This is called self-protection, do you understand? He carefully covered Ling Shuangxiu with a quilt. Shannon tiptoed back to the next room and breathed a sigh of relief. He leaned against the wall and asked with lingering fear. System, how far have we gone in the plot? The system answered slowly. Host, don't worry. It's only halfway. Shannon suddenly felt dizzy. What, only halfway? How long will I have to suffer? The system continued leisurely. Oh, by the way, I haven't told you the most exciting part yet. Shannon asked vigilantly, what exciting part? The system said lightly. In the end, you will be sacrificed to revive the so-called white moonlight of Ling Shuangxiu. Only then will the plot be truly over. What sacrifice? Resurrect the white moonlight? Are you kidding? The system laughed. How could that be? This is arranged by the plot. Host, don't you always want to know the ending? Now that I tell you, are you happy? Wait, system. What will happen after I am sacrificed? Will I die? Oh, that. Don't worry, host. After you are sacrificed, it will be a complete death, and you can go to the next world. Shannon was stunned for a moment, and then heaved a sigh of relief. Why, host, are you relieved now? Didn't you just say that you would never let yourself be sacrificed? Shannon coughed awkwardly. Cough. I just want to confirm it. Know yourself and know the enemy, and you will never be in danger in 100 battles. Shannon breathed a sigh of relief and finally felt relieved. He pulled the small quilt over, covered himself with peace of mind, and prepared to have a good sleep. Finally I can rest. Shannon muttered to himself and slowly closed his eyes. However, just as he was about to fall asleep, he suddenly felt a chill. Shannon opened his eyes suddenly, and always felt that there was an extra person in the room. He sat up alertly and looked around. There seemed to be nothing in the dim room, but the feeling of being spied on was lingering. He turned over. Oh, who cares? Anyway, the world of cultivation is haunted. Normal. The system was a little surprised. Host, aren't you afraid? Shannon yawned. What are you afraid of? Can Ling Shuangxiu be more scary? If someone is really peeking, let him see enough. I'm so handsome, it doesn't matter if he looks at me more. Host, your attitude changes too quickly, right? This is called strong adaptability. Besides, worrying is useless, it's better to have a good sleep. I don't know what I will face tomorrow, and it's most important to conserve my energy. After saying that, he turned over, and soon there was a sound of even breathing. The system looked at Shannon speechlessly. This guy can really lie flat. The next day, Shannon was called to the main hall as soon as he woke up. He stretched. It's so early. But it's okay, I can finish the task earlier and get rid of it earlier. When he arrived at the main hall, he found Ling Shuangxiu bathing. Shannon simply leaned against the pillar and waited. After a while, Ling Shuangxiu came out coldly and looked at his face calmly. Suddenly, she didn't know why. Without saying a word, she locked Shannon in the dungeon. Shannon looked confused. Did I do something wrong? The system immediately jumped out excitedly. Host, here it comes. In this section, you will be locked in the dungeon and tortured physically and mentally before being released after taking drugs. Shannon scratched his head. Wait, aren't the first few of you my daily routine? What does the last one? Taking drugs mean? The system chuckled. You'll know when the time comes. Shannon sighed and lay on the straw pile in the dungeon. Forget it, it's all plot anyway, come if you want to. But system, can you tell me, this medicine won't have any strange effects, right? Host, just wait and see, I promise to make you unforgettable. Okay, I'd better take a nap. Anyway, I can't escape, so I might as well conserve my energy. After saying that, he closed his eyes and prepared to take a nap. It seems that he will have a lot to endure next. Chapter 24. In the Jianzhong prison cell. Shannon looked at the torture instruments and chains around him and couldn't help complaining. Hey, system, are you sure this plot is serious? These things don't look right no matter how you look at them. What on earth does Ling Shuangxiu want to do? Is this popular in the world of immortal cultivation? The system chuckled. Host, don't you understand she wants to make you her own? Shannon was stunned for a moment. What do you mean, am I not already her subordinate? The system said meaningfully. No, host. She wants more than that. She wants you to belong to her completely, both physically and mentally. Shannan's eyes widened. Wait, you mean? She wants. The system interrupted him. Yes, it's what you think. Get ready for the exciting plot, host. Shannon suddenly felt a chill and shuddered. Along with this deep chill, he knew it well. It seems that Ling Shuangxiu is here. Sure enough, Ling Shuangxiu walked into the dungeon coldly. Her eyes were as sharp as a knife and stared at Shannon. She said nothing, just waved her hand. Immediately, a guard came forward. She began to use chains to firmly fix Shannan's limbs. Shannon complained wildly in his heart. Hey, 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 what are you doing? Is it really going to be a little stimulating? I'm not mentally prepared. That. Your Excellency, what are you going to do? Ling Shuangxiu still had no expression on her face, just looking at him coldly. System, are you sure this is really a world of immortal cultivation? Why does it feel more like the plot of some strange novels? The system said gloatingly, Host, enjoy the next plot. Ling Shuangxiu walked in front of him, her tone calm. Just to make you more like him. Then, she took out a branding iron with a lotus pattern from the side. The action was swift and it pressed towards Shan'an. Shannan's eyes widened immediately and he shouted in horror. Wait! Your Majesty! Calm down! The moment the soldering iron touched his skin, the intense pain made Shannon scream out. Ah! System! You're a jerk! Shannon gritted his teeth and said inwardly. Is this the stimulation you mentioned? What kind of stimulation is this? The system responded innocently. Host, I didn't say what kind of stimulation it was. Shannon gasped in pain. Your Majesty, we can talk it out, there's no need to do this, right? Ling Shuangxiu turned a deaf ear and continued her work. Shannon shouted in despair inwardly. Hey! Is this really a world of immortal cultivation? Why do I feel like I have traveled to some strange place? The system said gloatingly, Host, this is a good opportunity to enhance feelings. Enhance what? This is going to kill me. Shannon was in so much pain that he was sweating coldly. Suddenly he smelled the aroma of barbecue. He was stunned for a moment. Then he realized that it was coming from his body. Oh my God! I smell the aroma of barbecue. Isn't this too magical? Shannon thought with tears in his eyes. He actually felt like eating barbecue. Fortunately, the system blocked some of the pain perception in time. Otherwise, he might really faint. Despite this, the remaining pain still made him grit his teeth. Ling Shuangxiu looked at the red lotus mark on Shannan's waist with satisfaction. She said coldly, Very good, now you are more like him. Host, congratulations, you are one step closer to him. Ling Shuangxiu suddenly showed a strange smile. Let the guards bring a bowl of medicine with a strange smell. Shannon was shocked. It's over, it's coming. Ling Shuangxiu forced his mouth open. Pour the medicine in. Shannon wanted to resist. But he was bound by the chains and had no strength to struggle. The medicine went into his throat. Shannon felt his consciousness begin to blur and his whole body was weak. As if he was about to melt. System. What kind of medicine is this? Shannon asked in a daze. The system smiled but did not answer. Host, enjoy it. Just when Shannon thought something unspeakable was going to happen, Ling Shuangxiu said coldly. Very good, after drinking this medicine, you will only remember me. Shannon was stunned, and then realized that he had misunderstood. Ling Shuangxiu continued. From now on, there will only be me in your memory, and you will only live for me. Shannon complained in his heart. Isn't this more terrifying my memory? Host, it seems that you are really going to become her thing now. Oh. Shannon closed his eyes helplessly, feeling the effect of the drug slowly taking effect. He didn't know what would happen next. He could only pray silently in his heart, hoping that the mission in this world would end soon. Shannon closed his eyes, waiting for the feeling of memory disappearing. However, after a long time, how come I still remember who I am? Shannon wondered. Especially this pit system didn't forget. The system suddenly said with a smile. Hee, didn't you expect it, host? In order to complete the mission, your memory is archived in our main system. Shannon was immediately furious. Hey! You pit! Why didn't you say it earlier? The system pretended to be innocent. I just want to see the host's reaction. Your expression just now is really wonderful. But... Shannon suddenly realized something. Since I haven't lost my memory, how should I act next? Just then, Ling Shuangxiu came over. She looked at him coldly. Now, tell me, who do you belong to? Shannon was startled and quickly began his impromptu performance. I belong to your excellency. I only remember your excellency. In the dim dungeon, the shadow of the torch danced on the stone wall. The sound of the chain colliding echoed in the empty cell. Shannon was firmly fixed to the wooden stake beside the wall. Shannon's clothes were messy at this moment, and his black hair was hanging in front of his forehead. His pair of clear eyes on weekdays, now stared blankly at the front. Ling Shuangxiu stood in front of him, wearing a white dress that was whiter than snow. Her ice blue eyes were cold and ruthless. There was no expression on her beautiful face. Like a perfect ice sculpture. Tell me, who are you? Ling Shuangxiu asked coldly. Shannon pretended to be just awake. He blinked and looked at Ling Shuangxiu in confusion. Who am I don't remember. He paused and added. But... I remember you. You are... my master, right? A hint of satisfaction flashed in Ling Shuangxiu's eyes. But soon it returned to coldness. Very good. So, what do you remember? Shannon shook his head and pretended to be in pain. I don't remember anything. Only remember you, your majesty. I belong to you, right? Ling Shuangxiu nodded gently, reaching out and stroking the lotus mark on Shannon's waist. Yes, you are mine. From now on, you only need to remember this. Shannon lowered his head obediently. Yes, your majesty. I only belong to you. In his heart, Shannon couldn't help but complain, this acting is really tiring. Host, your performance is wonderful, keep it up. Chapter 25. Ling Shuangxiu leaned down coldly. Her movements seemed gentle, but they were full of irresistible power. Shannon could feel the chill emanating from her. It seemed as if she was going to freeze him. Her slender fingers gently brushed the lotus mark on Shannon's waist. The touch made Shannon tremble involuntarily. The corners of Ling Shuangxiu's mouth slightly raised. A barely perceptible smile appeared. "Let's go, my things," Ling Shuangxiu whispered. There was a hint of possessiveness in her voice. She hugged Shannon and walked out of the dark dungeon gracefully, towards the direction of her own hall. Shannon could feel her breath brushing against his ears. He couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Shannon muttered to himself. "Why does this development feel a little wrong?" The system said gloatingly. "Host, the exciting plot has just begun." The candle light in the hall flickered, reflecting an ambiguous light and shadow. Ling Shuangxiu coldly put Shannon on the bed. Her tone was calm and indifferent. "Change clothes for me." Shannon was shocked. But he still pretended to be obedient. "Yes, Your Majesty." The system was originally ready to complain with great interest, but suddenly became serious. "Host, we found a serious problem." Shannon asked in confusion. "What's the problem?" The system silently said a string of strange words, and %at. "What bird language are you talking about?" Shannon was even more confused. In desperation, Shannon could only bite the bullet and step forward. With trembling hands, he untied Ling Shuangxiu's hair crown. At the moment when his fingers touched the hair crown, suddenly, his eyes went black and he fainted. After an unknown period of time, Shannon woke up slowly. His first reaction was to check his body. Especially behind him, he breathed a sigh of relief after making sure he was safe. "Hey!" Fortunately nothing happened. Shannon secretly rejoiced. But what happened just now? The system was silent for a while before slowly speaking. "Host, the situation may be much more complicated than we thought." Shannon frowned. "What do you mean?" The system said mysteriously. "This world may not be as simple as we thought." Shannon sighed helplessly. "Well, it's the Riddler again. It seems that we can only take it one step at a time." The system sighed, with helplessness in its tone. "Host, it's not that I don't want to go on with the plot, it's..." Then there was another series of incomprehensible noises, and %at. Shannon held his forehead irritably. "Shut up!" He looked around and sat on the chair vigilantly. "I don't know when Ling Shuangxiu will come back." Just then, footsteps were heard in the distance. Shannon immediately became nervous. "Oh no, is Ling Shuangxiu back?" The system hurriedly reminded. "Host, pretend to have amnesia." Shannon quickly lay down and put on a blank expression. Ling Shuangxiu pushed the door open and came in, holding an exquisite food box in her hand. There seemed to be a subtle softness on her cold face. The system couldn't help but complain. "I didn't expect you to be favored, host. I didn't expect she likes this flavor." Shannon was speechless and felt a headache. But he still pretended to be blank on his face. He looked at Ling Shuangxiu with a dull look. Ling Shuangxiu put the food box on the table beside the bed. "Try it and see if it suits your taste." Shannon carefully opened the food box. The food inside was light and elegant. It was obviously a taste that only the original owner, Shannon, would like. This startled Shannon, who didn't know how to respond. Shannon pretended to be confused and took a light bite. Then he showed a surprised expression. "This taste. I seem to have eaten it somewhere." Ling Shuangxiu's eyes flashed with a strange emotion, but soon returned to the cold. Really, do you remember where you ate it? Shannon shook his head, pretending to be troubled. I can't remember. I just feel very familiar and like it. Ling Shuangxiu nodded gently. Well, then eat more. Shannon was eating while thinking in his heart. What's the situation? Why did Ling Shuangxiu cook the food that the original owner liked? Could it be that she? At this moment, Ling Shuangxiu spoke coldly. Rest after eating. Tomorrow. We still have a lot of things to do. It was late at night. Shannon quietly opened his eyes and looked around. He was surprised to find that the big gold chain that bound him in the past was gone. What's going on? Shannon sat up carefully. He moved his limbs. The system said faintly. It seems that Ling Shuangxiu is much more confident in you, host. Maybe she thinks that you have been drugged and are completely obedient. Shannon got out of bed quietly and walked to the door. What surprised him even more was that the door was not locked. He pushed the door open carefully and walked out of the hall. The courtyard under the moonlight was quiet and beautiful, with the fragrance of flowers everywhere. It seems that I can really walk around in the courtyard at will. Shannon was secretly happy. But he didn't dare to relax his vigilance too much. Host, be careful. This may be a test from Ling Shuangxiu. Shannon nodded. I know. But since there is a chance, why not look around? Maybe we can find some clues. He strolled in the courtyard, admiring the lotus flowers under the moon. Suddenly, he noticed that something seemed to be flashing in a hidden corner. That is. Shannon was about to approach to check, when he suddenly heard footsteps behind him. He quickly pretended to be confused and looked back. Ling Shuangxiu was standing in the moonlight, staring at him coldly. What are you doing here? Ling Shuangxiu asked lightly. Shannon pretended to be innocent. Your Majesty. I can't sleep, so I want to go out for a walk. I'm sorry, did I do something wrong? Ling Shuangxiu stared at him for a while. Since you can't sleep, then accompany me to watch the moon. The moonlight was like water, falling in the courtyard. Ling Shuangxiu and Shannon stood side by side, quietly looking at the bright moon in the sky. Ling Shuangxiu was dressed in white, and looked even more ethereal in the moonlight. Shannon pretended to be at a loss, and occasionally stole a glance at Ling Shuangxiu. Ling Shuangxiu suddenly spoke, her voice as cold as frost. Do you remember where we first met? Shannon's heart tightened, but he pretended to try to recall. I don't remember. Your Majesty, my memory seems to have disappeared. Ling Shuangxiu narrowed her eyes and looked at him coldly. Really, then do you remember what your favorite flower is? Shannon secretly rejoiced that he had secretly read the script of this bloody novel before. He pretended to suddenly remember something. Is it a lotus? I remember there is a lotus mark on my waist. A trace of satisfaction flashed in Ling Shuangxiu's eyes. But soon it returned to coldness. Ling Shuangxiu nodded gently and reached out to touch Shannon's cheek. It doesn't matter. Even if you don't remember anything, it's enough to just remember that you are mine. Chapter 26. Shannon suppressed his discomfort and pretended to be attached. Yes, Your Majesty. I will always be yours. Just then, a breeze blew, bringing the fragrance of flowers in the distance. Ling Shuangxiu suddenly asked, what kind of flower is this? Shannon was not careful for a moment and blurted out. It's night-blooming jasmine. On the first day he was locked up. There is a large area of it planted in the woods next to it. As soon as he said it, he realized that he had let it slip. Ling Shuangxiu's eyes became sharp in an instant. The system reminded him hurriedly. Oops, host. You are exposed. Shannon hurriedly made amends. Ah. I don't know why I know this. Maybe. The previous memory suddenly popped up. Ling Shuangxiu stared at him for a long time, and finally sighed softly. Maybe. It seems that your memory is slowly recovering. But. Her voice suddenly became cold. Don't dream of recovering all your memories. You just need to remember that you are mine. Otherwise, I don't mind turning you into a fool next time and keeping you by my side. Shannon nodded repeatedly. Yes, Your Majesty. I will always be yours. Ling Shuangxiu then let go of Shannon's hand. It's getting late, go back and rest. The next morning, Shannon just opened his eyes. He found a group of strange maids coming in one after another. This is. The system quietly reminded, Host, be careful. It seems that Ling Shuangxiu has a new move. An older maid stepped forward and said respectfully. Sir, please let us change your clothes and wash you. Shannon nodded and let the maids fiddle with him. He was surprised to find that these maids seemed to know the habits of the original owner very well. The clothes they chose for him, the hairstyle they combed, even the accessories they wore. They are all exactly the same as the original owner's style. Are you going to dress me up like the original owner? Shannon thought to himself. All morning, Shannon's every move was closely watched by the maids. Whenever he behaved in a way that was inconsistent with the original owner, a maid would come forward to correct him. Sir, you should taste the soup before eating. Sir, you should walk more calmly. Sir, you should keep this posture when reading. Shannon was dizzy with these meticulous instructions. But he still tried to cooperate. Host, you are just a puppet now. Shannon responded in his heart, shut up. I am helpless too, okay. Just when Shannon was about to collapse from being tortured by various rules, Ling Shuangxiu suddenly appeared at the door of the hall. She glanced around coldly. Then she walked in front of Shannon. How does it feel? Ling Shuangxiu asked calmly. Shannon pretended to be at a loss. Your Majesty. I don't quite understand. Why do you do this? A hint of complex emotions flashed through Ling Shuangxiu's eyes. But soon she returned to her coldness. These are what you should do, you will get used to it slowly. Shannon lowered his head, but his heart was full of doubts. What does she want to do? Why did she shape me into the original owner? The system suddenly interrupted. Host, I have a bold guess. Shannon responded in his heart. Speak. The system said mysteriously. Maybe. Ling Shuangxiu is reshaping a perfect you. How wicked. That's right. After Shannon heard what the system said, his heart was numb. But on the surface, he still maintained a submissive and gentle look. He looked up at Ling Shuangxiu. His eyes were full of attachment and obedience. Your Excellency. Shannon said softly, with a hint of deliberate confusion and fragility in his voice. I will obey everything you say. I may not remember the past, but I know that as long as I follow your guidance, I will not go wrong. A hint of satisfaction flashed in Ling Shuangxiu's eyes. She reached out and gently stroked Shannon's cheek. Very good, you must remember what you said today. Shannon lowered his head slightly and pretended to be moved. Yes, Your Excellency. I will always be yours. The system complained in Shannon's mind. Wow, host, your acting is good. It's simply the level of an actor. Shannon responded secretly in his heart. Shut up. I am also desperate, okay. He himself felt that he was so hypocritical that he was about to vomit. Ling Shuangxiu retracted her hand and said coldly. Continue your study. Remember, you have to become the most perfect you. Shannon nodded respectfully. Yes, Your Majesty. I will not let you down. A week later, in the courtyard, Shannon sat in front of an exquisite piano table, his fingers gently stroking the strings, playing a melodious and graceful movement. Ling Shuangxiu stood not far away, watching his every move coldly. Shannon looked like he was concentrating on playing the piano, but he was complaining crazily in his heart. This pervert! He tortured me to death. Just to copy a perfect me. You are really sick. Host, calm down. Your performance now is top-notch. It's exactly the same as the original owner. Do you think I want this? This week was worse than death. Indeed, the past week was a nightmare for Shannon. From morning to night, he was surrounded by various rules and etiquette. Walking posture, speaking tone. All in accordance with the habits of the original owner. If he was not careful, he would be corrected by the group of strict maids. Now Shannon. From appearance to behavior, it is no different from the original owner. He can even feel that Ling Shuangxiu's eyes looking at him are full of satisfaction and obsession. Just then, Ling Shuangxiu slowly approached. You play well. It seems that you have fully recovered your previous skills. Shannon stopped his hand and looked up with a professional smile. Thank you for your compliment, Your Excellency. It is my greatest honor to satisfy Your Excellency. Ling Shuangxiu reached out and gently stroked Shannon's cheek. Very good, you are perfect now. Shannon immediately pretended to be attached. Everything is because of the guidance of Your Majesty. Without you, I am nothing. The system couldn't help but complain. Wow, host, you flatter me so well. I'm getting goosebumps. Ling Shuangxiu seemed very satisfied with Shannon's reaction, with a slight smile on her lips. Keep playing. I want to listen to that song. Thinking of you. Shannon was startled, but he remained calm on the surface. He nodded gently and put his hands on the strings again. Yes, Your Majesty. Chapter 27. Ling Shuangxiu slowly stood up, and her slender fingers gently stroked the lotus mark on Shannon's waist. Shannon was shocked, but he still looked pitiful on the surface. He trembled slightly, and a trace of panic and dependence appeared in his eyes. Your Excellency. Ling Shuangxiu's fingers lingered on the lotus mark. Your Excellency, did I do something wrong? Ling Shuangxiu did not answer, but continued to stroke the mark. Shannon could feel her breathing become rapid. Alarm bells rang in his heart. The system hurriedly reminded. Host, be careful. Looking at this posture, she is not going to be beastly, right? Just when Shannon thought Ling Shuangxiu was going to take further action, she suddenly withdrew her hand. Let's stop here today. Ling Shuangxiu left. At night, Shannon was called to Ling Shuangxiu's bedroom by a maid. Push open the gorgeous palace door. A strong aroma of wine hits his face. Shannon was surprised to find that the noble and cold Ling Shuangxiu was drunk at this moment. Her long hair was scattered on her shoulders. There was an unclear coldness in her eyes. Your Majesty. Shannon called carefully. Ling Shuangxiu looked up suddenly, her eyes were blurred but a little fierce. She suddenly stood up and staggered towards Shannon and grabbed his collar. Why? Why do you want to leave me? The fierce killing intent filled the hall for a while. Shannon was shocked. But after a week of special training, he was able to quickly get into the role. He immediately showed a painful and confused expression and responded softly. Your Majesty, I have never thought of leaving you. Ling Shuangxiu's strength increased, almost crushing Shen An's bones. Liar! You clearly. Her voice was choked with sobs, and tears flashed in her eyes. Shannon carefully reached out and gently touched Ling Shuangxiu's shoulder. Your Majesty, please calm down. I will never leave you. You are everything to me. Wow, host, your acting skills are getting better and better. The system immediately complained online. Ling Shuangxiu's emotions seemed to calm down a little. But she still held Shannon tightly. Her eyes were cold, as if she could send Shannon to the west immediately if she said no. Really you won't leave me again? Shannon gently hugged Ling Shuangxiu into his arms, his voice gentle and firm. Your Majesty, I swear that I will never leave you in this life. You are my whole world. Without you, I will have nothing. But you clearly. Shannon gently stroked her long hair and comforted her softly. Your Majesty, but now I just want to stay with you forever. Please forgive me and give me a chance to make amends. Ling Shuangxiu looked up at Shannon, her eyes full of complex emotions. Are you really my Shannon? Shannon was shocked, but still kept a gentle smile on the surface. Yes, Your Majesty. I will always be your Shen An. Ling Shuangxiu finally relaxed. Shannon carefully helped her to the bed and said softly. Your Majesty, you need to rest. Ling Shuangxiu held Shen An's hand, with a hint of pleading in her voice. Don't go. Stay with me. Shannon nodded gently. Okay, Your Majesty. I'm not going anywhere. Although Ling Shuangxiu was drunk, but she still seemed unwilling to completely let down her guard. She stood up shakily and staggered to the cabinet beside her. Shen An's heart was alarmed. But she still remained docile on the surface. Your Excellency, do you need anything? Let me help you. Ling Shuangxiu waved her hand. Took out a pair of exquisite silver chains from the cabinet. She turned to face Shannon. A hint of complex emotions flashed in her eyes. You said you wouldn't leave me, right? Shannon suppressed his inner uneasiness. She smiled gently. Yes, Your Excellency. I will never leave you. Ling Shuangxiu shook the chain in her hand. The voice was a little drunk. So you wouldn't mind this, would you? Shannon secretly said in his heart that it was not good. But he still pretended to understand and obey. Your Excellency, I am willing to do anything as long as it can make you feel at ease. Ling Shuangxiu nodded with satisfaction and began to tie Shen An's hands and feet with chains. The cold metal touch made Shannon shiver. But he still suppressed his discomfort. He kept a gentle expression. This way. You can't run away. Ling Shuangxiu murmured to herself, with a bit of satisfaction and fatigue in her voice. Shannon responded softly. Your Majesty, I will never run away. You are my whole world. After completing the protective measures, Ling Shuangxiu seemed to finally let go. She staggered back to the bed. Grabbed the wine pot, tilted her head and drank the last sip of wine. Shen An, don't leave me again. Ling Shuangxiu spoke vaguely, her eyelids getting heavier. Shannon comforted softly. Your Majesty, I'm here. I will never leave. Ling Shuangxiu finally couldn't hold on and fell asleep on the bed. The system whispered, Host, what should we do now? Shannon sighed in his heart, what else can we do? Wait. The next morning, Ling Shuangxiu slowly opened her eyes, and the headache from the hangover made her frown. When she turned her head to look at her side, a trace of shock flashed in her eyes. Shannon was lying beside her in disheveled clothes, his hands and feet bound by chains. Ling Shuangxiu looked at her messy bed and clothes again. Ling Shuangxiu was silent for a while, with complex emotions flashing in her eyes. She seemed to be trying to recall what happened last night, but her drunken memory was obviously very vague. Just then, Shannon moved slightly, pretending to have just woken up. He opened his eyes, and the moment he saw Ling Shuangxiu, a trace of shyness and attachment appeared on his face. "Your Majesty." "Good morning," Shannon said softly. There was a hint of deliberate panic and sweetness in his voice. The system complained again, "Wow, host. Your acting skills are worthy of an Oscar." Ling Shuangxiu looked at Shannon, her voice a little uncertain. Last night. We. Shannon immediately got into the role, with a blush on his face. "Your Majesty, last night. You were very gentle. I am very happy." A trace of guilt and pity flashed in Ling Shuangxiu's eyes, and she reached out to touch Shannon's cheek. "Honor, did I force you?" Shannon shook his head gently and smiled sweetly. "No, Your Majesty. Being with you is my greatest happiness. It's just..." He shook his locked wrist, "This. It hurts a little." Ling Shuangxiu then remembered the chains and hurriedly untied them. Shannon gently rubbed his wrists, his eyes showing attachment and tenderness. "Honor, I..." Ling Shuangxiu hesitated to speak. Shannon took the initiative to approach and gently hugged Ling Shuangxiu. "Your Majesty, don't blame yourself. I will always be yours. Last night just made our relationship a step further." Chapter 28. Ling Shuangxiu seemed to be moved by Shannon's words and hugged him back tightly. "Honor, have you really forgiven me?" Shannon said gently. "Your Majesty, you will never need my forgiveness. Because everything about me belongs to you." Shannon leaned gently in Ling Shuangxiu's arms on the surface, but his heart was on the verge of collapse. "Help!" he screamed wildly in his heart, "I really can't stand it. How long will this bloody plot last?" The system laughed gloatingly. "Ha ha ha, host, didn't you enjoy it? That confession just now was really touching." Shannon roared in his heart. "Enjoy it? Do you think I want to do this otherwise? Ling Shuangxiu would hang me on the city wall as soon as she got up." The system continued to tease, "Oh, don't say that. Look at this kind of domineering president style of love. Isn't it what many people have always longed for? I long for you. I just want to live a good life and don't want to be entangled by this lunatic." The system laughed even more happily, "Don't be stubborn, host. You just said that everything I have belongs to you with all your heart. Do you want me to record it for you, so you can take it out and reminisce about it when you have nothing to do in the future?" Shannon wanted to strangle this annoying system. "Shut up. If you say that again, I will." Just then, Ling Shuangxiu slightly loosened her arms. She looked at Shannon's eyes affectionately. "Honor, you are so nice." Shannon immediately switched back to a gentle and affectionate expression, and said softly, "Your Excellency." The system was cheering on the side. "Wow, host, your face-changing speed is even faster than the face-changing in Sichuan opera." "Shut up. Otherwise, I will uninstall you later." The next day, Shannon was playing a suspended movie through the system. "Host, the important plot is about to begin. Now go to the last room of the hall to see Ling Shuangxiu." Shannon's heart trembled, and he quickly put away the screen and walked towards the hall. As he went deeper, the surroundings became more gloomy and cold. as if hiding a secret that could not be told. Pushing open the last door, Ling Shuangxiu's calm voice came. You shouldn't have come. She stood quietly in front of a huge ice coffin. In the coffin lay a body that looked like Shen An. Ling Shuangxiu whispered, I didn't intend to do this. The system finally revealed the truth. Host, she asked you to learn everything about Shen An. It is to revive the real Shannon. Those actions are to replicate and train your body to be consistent with Shen An. When the body is completely suitable, you can lead the soul into the body and replace him with you. Shannon immediately entered the play and read the last line. Is this the truth? I am just a substitute. Ling Shuangxiu turned around, with complex emotions flashing in her eyes. You are smarter than I thought. Yes, this is the truth. I have been waiting for this moment, waiting for my inner to come back. All the past events suddenly made sense now. So, those special trainings, those intimacy, were all just to make me more like him. Ling Shuangxiu nodded. You've learned very well, and you can almost perfectly replace him. But... Her eyes turned cold. You're not him after all. Shannon took a step back, still pretending to be terrified. So, what should I do now? Are you going to kill me? Ling Shuangxiu shook her head. No, I need you to be alive. Only in this way can I complete the final ritual. Your existence was meant for this moment. Don't let me down. Shannon was locked back in his room again, and he had long been accustomed to this treatment. Lying on the bed, he leisurely picked up an apple and took a bite. Hey, back to this familiar place again. Shannon said with a chuckle. But this should be the last time, right? Why, host, are you reluctant to leave? Do you want me to ask Ling Shuangxiu for you to stay a few more days? Shannon rolled his eyes. Come on, I can't wait for this to end. I'm going crazy if I stay in this damn place any longer. The system laughed. Oh, I think you're enjoying it. Being embraced by a beautiful woman, eating and drinking delicious food. This kind of life is what many people dream of. Shannon gritted his teeth. Enjoy it, you haven't experienced it. I'm always worried that I'll be torn into pieces by that crazy woman if I say something wrong. The system continued to tease. Tisk tisk, the host's acting is really good. I almost believed the horrified expression in front of the ice coffin just now. Shannon smiled proudly. That's right, otherwise how could I live until now? But to be honest, this time it's really over, I'm a little uncomfortable. The system asked curiously. Oh, can't bear to part with Ling Shuangxiu. Shannon immediately retorted. Bullshit. I can't bear to part with such good material. After I go back, I can write a novel called The Years I Was a Stand in Another World. The system laughed. Host, you'd better stop dreaming. With your writing style, I guess even dogs won't read what you write. Heh, what do you know, this is my personal experience, absolutely exciting and gripping. Shannon thought. Maybe, this is the so-called calm before death. Then he couldn't help but complain about himself. What am I thinking about? I'm not really going to die. In the next world, I must let myself go. Chapter 29. 3 days later, Shannon was brought to the hall for the sacrificial ceremony. The hall was cold and gloomy, and the real Shannon lay quietly in the huge ice coffin. Ling Shuangxiu stood in the center of the hall, wearing a white dress that was whiter than snow, with fluttering sleeves, like a fairy from the ninth heaven descending to the mortal world. Her long black hair fell to her waist, and a few strands of silver hair were casually tied up, adding a bit of fairy spirit. Shannon stood in front of the altar and felt the rich spiritual energy surging around him. Ling Shuangxiu walked slowly, and every step seemed to be stepping on the void, floating out of the world. The time has come. Let's start the final ceremony. Shannon resisted the desire to complain in his heart and put on an expression of being ready to die. He silently complained in his heart, "It's finally over, don't make any mistakes." The system whispered, "Host, don't forget your lines." Ling Shuangxiu walked in front of Shannon, and a subtle apology flashed in her deep eyes. She whispered, "Shannon, I'm sorry." Shannon thought, "Come on, why act affectionate?" But on the surface, he showed a gentle smile, "Your Majesty, no need to apologize." Ling Shuangxiu raised the dagger and cut Shannon's palm. The blood dripped on the ice coffin and instantly turned into strange lines. The intense pain came, as if all the bones in the body were about to be crushed. Shannon grimaced in pain, but still endured the discomfort and prepared to say his last words. The system urged, "Host, it's your turn." Shannon took a deep breath, used all his strength, and said with a trembling but affectionate voice, "Your Majesty. Even so. I love you deeply." After saying that, he weakly fell into Ling Shuangxiu's arms and closed his eyes. Ling Shuangxiu hugged Shannon, with the complex emotion flashing in her eyes. She gently stroked Shannon's cheek and whispered, "Shannon, rest in peace." Shannon lay in Ling Shuangxiu's arms, but he was madly complaining in his heart. "Oh my god, this line is so corny that I have goosebumps. What is in this author's mind?" The system couldn't help laughing. "Host, your acting skills are getting better and better. I almost believed the line just now." Shannon rolled his eyes in his heart, "Come on, let's end this ridiculous plot quickly. I can't wait to go to the next world." Just then, a dazzling light burst out from the ice coffin. Shannon felt his consciousness slowly dissipating. "It's finally over," he said silently in his heart, with the expectation of a new world. Shannon's consciousness completely disappeared in this world. A dazzling light burst out from the ice coffin, illuminating the entire hall. The light gradually dissipated, and the real Shannon slowly opened his eyes. His appearance was exactly the same as the stand-in just now, but his eyes were a little more gloomy. Shannon looked around blankly, and his eyes finally fell on Ling Shuangxiu. He frowned slightly, his voice was a little hoarse, "Your Majesty. How could I?" Ling Shuangxiu lowered her eyes, her voice was calm and a little indifferent. "It was me who resurrected you with the body of someone else." Hearing this, tears welled up in Shannon's eyes instantly. "Your Majesty, I really miss you." Ling Shuangxiu took a step back slightly, avoiding Shannon's hand. She suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of loss and emptiness in her heart. She was completely unable to feel the expected joy. Shannon knelt on the ground, tears streaming down his face. "Your Majesty, I have been wandering on the Yellow Spring Road for these years, missing you day and night. It is a great honor to see you again." Ling Shuangxiu looked at Shannon crying in front of her expressionlessly, but she was thinking in her heart, why can't I be happy at all?" She recalled the words that the substitute Shannon said before he died, "Even so, I love you deeply." A sharp pain suddenly surged in her heart. Ling Shuangxiu suppressed the fluctuations in her heart and said coldly, "Get up, there is no need to do this." Shannon raised his head, his eyes full of passionate love. "Your Majesty, I am willing to go through fire and water for you, and I will not refuse death." Looking at Shannon's expression, Ling Shuangxiu felt strange and alienated. She couldn't help asking herself in her heart, is this really the person I have always wanted to resurrect? Just then, Ling Shuangxiu suddenly remembered the little things about the stand-in Shannon in daily life. his mischievousness, his cunning, his occasional sincerity. These are all things that the real Shannon in front of her does not have. For the first time, Ling Shuangxiu felt confused and regretful. She didn't know whether she was right or wrong. Shannon, who was kneeling on the ground, was still chattering about his loyalty and love. But Ling Shuangxiu felt irritated and suffocated. Chapter 30. Ling Shuangxiu stood up coldly, turned around and walked towards the palace. Shannon followed closely behind, pressing forward step by step. Her uneasiness became stronger and stronger, and she always felt that something was wrong. Suddenly, Ling Shuangxiu remembered the Guqin, Shen An's favorite magic weapon when he was alive. She waved her hand to signal the attendant to bring the Guqin, and ordered Shannon to play it. Shannon stretched out his hand to touch the Guqin, but was bounced away by a powerful force the moment he touched it. His face instantly became gloomy and terrifying, and a trace of evil red light flashed in his eyes. Shannon sneered. "How ridiculous, Sword Master! The one you sacrificed is the real reincarnation of Shannon, and I am just a monster resurrected by evil magic." Ling Shuangxiu's pupils shrank suddenly, and her heart was like a knife. Shannon continued. "You didn't use a spell to bring people back to life. It was an evil spell that summoned evil spirits to devour souls and occupy bodies. Now, I have devoured Shen An's soul, and this body belongs to me." He showed a ferocious smile. "Next, I will kill you. Take away your power, and then invade the entire cultivation world." Ling Shuangxiu's eyes changed from calm to dead, and the pain in her heart almost drowned her. But the next moment, her eyes ignited with raging anger. "Evil demons dare to be presumptuous in front of me." The sword master slowly drew out the Ice Soul Immortal Sword. The tip of the sword pointed directly at Shannon. In an instant, the entire cultivation world seemed to feel the power of this sword. "Shake the sky, destroy the evil demons." Ling Shuangxiu swung the sword, and the raging sword energy swept out. Shannon was swallowed up by this terrifying sword before he could react. The entire cultivation world was shaken, and all the cultivators felt this earth-shaking sword. When the sword energy dissipated, the figure of Shannon had disappeared. Only a wisp of black smoke rose up. Ling Shuangxiu put away the sword and stood up, the coldness in her eyes gradually dissipated. Instead, there was endless sadness and regret. She knelt on the ground, tears streaming down her face. "Shannon, I hurt you. I'm sorry." She finally understood that what she had been pursuing was nothing but a delusion. And the real Shannon had already left forever in that sacrifice. Ling Shuangxiu knelt on the ground. Her heart was like being cut by 1,000 knives. Pain, resentment, and guilt intertwined, almost tearing her apart. "Shen An, Shen An." She murmured to herself, her voice full of despair and madness. For a whole night, Ling Shuangxiu knelt on the spot like a sculpture. "Let the pain and obsession grow wildly in my heart." The next day, she slowly stood up, and her once black hair had turned into white hair. She opened her eyes, and her clear eyes turned scarlet. A strange red mark appeared on her forehead. Ling Shuangxiu had been possessed by the devil. She sneered. "What if Shannon left me? I will definitely find him back. Even if I have to crush this world, I will bring him back to me." Ling Shuangxiu's consciousness swept across the entire cultivation world. Suddenly, she noticed something unusual. Shannon. No, that stand-in Shannon, didn't seem to belong to this world. So that's it. Ling Shuangxiu's eyes flashed with a hint of fanaticism. No wonder I always felt that he was different. It turns out that he is from another world. She laughed wildly. In this case, I will travel through the heavens and the worlds to find you. Ling Shuangxiu looked up at the sky, her eyes full of morbid love and persistence. Shannon, wait for me. No matter where you escape, I will find you. You are mine, and you will always be mine. She began to frantically collect various secrets and study cross-border techniques. The cultivation world was in turmoil because of her actions, but Ling Shuangxiu no longer cared. In her eyes, the whole world was not as important as Shen day after day, year after year. Ling Shuangxiu's cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds, but her heart became more and more twisted. She had only one goal in her eyes, to find Shannon, at all costs. Shen. Ling Shuangxiu muttered to herself. When I find you, we will never be apart. Even if I have to destroy all the worlds, I will be with you. The world of cultivation fell into chaos because of Ling Shuangxiu's demonic possession, but she no longer cared. In her heart, there was only one obsession that kept growing: find Shannon, possess Shannon, and never let him leave. Shannon lay leisurely on the recliner in the system space. He knew nothing about Ling Shuangxiu's madness after he left. He stretched and said contentedly, "Finally it's over. This mission really exhausted me." The system reminded. "Host, the channel is ready, we can go to the next world." Shannon immediately became energetic. "What are you waiting for? Let's go. I hope the next world will be easier." As soon as the voice fell, Shannon's eyes went dark. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a luxurious room. However, his hands and feet were tightly tied. What the hell? Shannon struggled a few times and found that he couldn't get free at all. At this time, the door was pushed open. Before Shannon could respond, the system immediately began to introduce in his mind, "Host, this is a bloody domineering article." The original owner Shannon was in a coma due to a car accident. As the heir of the Shen family, he was in a coma, and the Shen family had to find you who looked similar to act in the play. This person in front of you is Guro, the original owner's fiancé. She just took you as a substitute for Shannon for your face. Shannon secretly thought that something was wrong, but he pretended to be calm on the surface. "Miss Gu." Guro interrupted him coldly, "Shut up. I'm not interested in your thoughts." She leaned down and looked at Shannon's face carefully. A hint of complex emotions flashed in those cold eyes. "Your face is pretty good, and you look like him." Shannon moved uneasily, trying to ease the embarrassment. Can I untie these ropes first? It's very uncomfortable." Guro sneered. "You wish. You should stay here until I'm sure you won't run away." She turned and walked to the corner of the room, picked up a glass of red wine and took a sip. "Listen, I don't care who sent you or your purpose. From now on, you are Shannon. All you have to do is follow what I say, understand?" Shannon smiled bitterly, and he continued to recite the lines. "I don't seem to have any choice, right?" Guro glanced at him coldly. "Smart? Remember, you are just a substitute. Don't dream of replacing the real Shannon." Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe and share your thoughts. Until next time, happy listening.